Chapter 3594. Internationally, although Melbourne was a country with a high crime rate, there had never been a terrorist attack like this. Unlike a certain Western country, no matter how strong the country was, there would be a few gun attacks from time to time because of the proliferation of guns. However, it was rare for civilians to be killed by guns in Melbourne. This time it happened. What was happening in front of them was the last thing Xia Jinyuan and the others wanted to see. It was related to the lives of others and their investigation during this period. Cobra hasn't shown up yet. Tell our brothers to stay calm. This place. Xia Jinyuan looked at the foreign citizen lying in a pool of blood and heard the sirens from afar. He lowered his eyes slightly and said softly, "This is not something we can handle." This was not something they could handle. If they were not on a mission, they could step forward bravely. However, they were on a mission now. How could they step forward so easily? Also, Xia Jinyuan looked at an 8-story building opposite the market. His gaze was slightly solemn. Cobra was now in that building. It was impossible for him not to know about such a big incident in the market. He might even be observing. If he and his comrades went out, they might be seen. In order to capture Cobra, the European man who was inextricably linked to Li Chuhai, it had been a whole year since the Department of Defense started the investigation until they took over the assassination. The army gave him 3 months, and he had to solve Cobra within 3 months. Now, they had all sneaked into the underground dark market that Cobra and Li Chuhai had partnered together and came here together with Cobra's people. At this time, they did not know who had suddenly opened fire at the market. If they suddenly made a move, it would be too sudden. This was because they had been warned before they came to the northern region that they must remember that no one was to act rashly without Cobra's orders. Once they made a move, their own safety would be a problem, let alone coming into contact with Cobra. This was the biggest reason why Xia Jinyuan could not help. VH's jaw tightened. He looked away and stopped watching. His voice sounded like it was squeezed out from between his teeth. But Cobra is very cunning. Once there is chaos here, Cobra will hide again immediately and will not show up in a short period of time. That's why we can't show ourselves. We have to stay in the underground market. Xia Jinyuan gently patted his comrade on the shoulder. They were all soldiers, and in the face of the tragedy in front of them, even if they were citizens of another country, they could not remain indifferent. However, the only way to get close to Cobra and deal with him was through the underground market. If the people in the underground market found out that they disobeyed Cobra's orders, all the efforts of the Department of Defense would be in vain. But they had to get rid of Cobra because this guy was the mastermind behind the kidnapping of the 4 scientists from our country. If they didn't rescue the 4 scientists in time, including Father Fu, in the end, everyone would fall into Cobra's hands. As for who else was behind Cobra, it wasn't just one person, it was an entire country. Spies were never backed by an individual, but by a country. Otherwise, who would they give the stolen secrets of other countries to? Naturally, it was the country that they worked for. Cobra was such a person. With the in-depth investigation by the National Defense, Cobra had a special line of spies in our country. The Snowfield Brigade's special forces were dispatched to deal with Cobra and destroy this special line of spies in our country. Chapter 3595. Cobra was too cunning. Even someone as cunning as Li Chuhai had to lower his head in front of Cobra. Because of this cunning, the National Defense Department immediately asked for the military's assistance after finding this person. In the end, they sent the Snowfield Brigade, their trump card, to take action. Solving Cobra was Xia Jinyuan's primary goal, and the sudden attack could only be handled by the local Melbourne police. The sirens were approaching. Xia Jinyuan glanced at the small building where Cobra was staying. He gestured to V8, and the two quickly retreated. Now that they were certain that Cobra was here, it was time for them to take action. In the undamaged 8-story building opposite the market, someone put away his binoculars. His eyes were cold, and his brows were tightly knitted. It seemed that his mood was affected by the attack at the market. This was a European man in his early 40s. He was extremely tall, and his light brown hair was naturally slightly curled. It was relatively long, reaching his shoulders. From the back, he looked like a depressed painter. His temperament was somewhat gloomy. There was a light knock on the door. It was not loud, and it seemed that he was afraid of disturbing the person inside. He only dared to knock 3 times, and after that, there was no sound. It was not until there was a sound from inside that the door opened. 2 tall men wearing silver-gray trousers and white shirts walked in. Then a local man walked in. The 2 men who came in first stood respectfully in the middle of the room, waiting for the man standing by the window to turn around. When a man who came in with them saw this, a trace of displeasure flashed in his eyes. However, he did not let his displeasure be seen, and it quickly disappeared from his eyes. He greeted the man standing in front of the window in Spanish. Melbourne was close to the equator and had a tropical oceanic atmosphere. Their official language was Spanish. The man who casually placed the binoculars by the window sill turned around. He glanced at the local Melbourne man who greeted him. He did not immediately say anything. Instead, he walked elegantly to the sofa and said in Spanish, "Was the shooting just now planned by Angus?" With that said, the tall man bent down and picked up the glass of red wine on the glass coffee table. He gently swirled the glass before taking a sip. The local man smiled and said, "Yes, there are often conflicts between gangs and drug dealers here. This kind of thing is actually very normal. It's just that today's movement is a little big, but it's not Angus's plan." Hearing this, the European man, sipping his red wine, glanced at his 2 subordinates. They nodded slightly, indicating that this was indeed the case. The man shook the crystal cup in his hand and smiled casually. "It seems that someone is very dissatisfied with me coming to the north, right? Go and tell Angus that I hope he can give me a good answer before dawn tomorrow. If I don't hear from him tomorrow, then I'm sorry. I don't think he and I can be best partners. Also, tell him that I prefer to settle things in the dark. I prefer to kill people who don't listen to me directly. Just like what my partner Lee said, if you don't want the grass to grow from the ground again, the best way is to pull out their roots." I think my partner Lee's words are very, very reasonable. I sincerely hope that my future partner Angus will listen to my advice. Chapter 3596. After that, the man ordered his subordinates to send the guest off. This time, he spoke in English, his mother tongue. After the Spanish-speaking local left, the European man walked towards the sunlight with a crystal cup in his hand. There was a canvas outside the sunlight. On the canvas, the colors of the sky were drawn using purple, brown, and dark red. Putting the crystal cup aside, the man picked up a brush and began to draw the current scene of the market. When he was drawing, his expression seemed to be particularly focused, mixing colors, coloring, sketching. Soon, the silhouette of the market was formed under the dark sky. When he added more brushes, there were figures lying on the streets. Below the figures, he had deliberately used dark red paint to outline them. That was blood flowing. When he drew the blood, the corner of the artist's mouth curled into a cruel smile. A large area of blood appeared under his brush and was directly presented on the canvas. The sound of sirens downstairs did not drown out the cries of the bereaved. The sun was high up in the sky, but the market was filled with blood and sorrow. Some people held their injured loved ones and screamed for help. Some saw that the ambulances could not enter the market, so they simply carried their loved ones who were still breathing and ran. Those who lost their loved ones hugged their cold-blooded loved ones and cried until they almost fainted. However, this did not affect the European man who was drawing. When he drew the blood, his eyes were filled with obvious excitement. The cries of grief did not disturb him, but instead gave him inspiration. He was Cobra, a guy who liked to draw. The colors he drew were always dark, cold, and filled with blood and gray. G3 slowly curled up. Then, a photo was sent to Comrade X's computer. This time, there's a front view. Quick, combine it. X received the photo and immediately said to his partner, "Why excitedly? My intuition tells me that it's this guy. G3 is amazing. You got a front view. I'm not afraid we can't get rid of Cobra this time." Y calmly looked at the photo sent over and immediately got to work. In order to eliminate Cobra, a total of 8 people came out. Captain Q, King, V8, Sparrowhawk, and Long Eagle took turns to keep an eye on Cobra's entourage, while he and Project X guarded the computer. As long as G3 and Z7 took a frontal photo of Cobra, they would immediately combine it to see if it matched the blurry photo taken by the National Defense Department. Following wise manipulation, the data matching Cobra's front clear photo and a blurry photo began to elongate. Y smiled faintly. Let's ask our captain to see if we could take action tonight. I have a feeling that tonight is a good time. After tonight, that might not be the case. After following Cobra for so long, they had only managed to find her first real foothold. The cunning enemy had finally shown her face. If they didn't seize this opportunity, they didn't know when they would have to wait. Xia Jinyuan thought the same. Cobra's whereabouts were very secretive. Even if he appeared in the underground market, he would not really show up for a long time. No one knew when he came and when he left. This time, if he did not come to the north to discuss cooperation with a local gang in Melbourne, and the north was very chaotic, Cobra needed to bring more people over. That was why the Snowfield Brigade had the opportunity. All the special forces of the Snowfield Brigade had gathered. Xia Jinyuan began to formulate the elimination plan. The time was set to take action tonight, and did not intend to delay it until the next day. Chapter 3597. This time, no matter how meticulous the Snowfield Brigade's plan was, it was still extremely dangerous. Cobra's influence in Melbourne was too great, so much so that the local gangs did not dare to provoke him. However, Cobra's whereabouts were too difficult to track. The National Defense took almost 11 months to find out about Cobra's existence, and the Snowfield Brigade took another 50 days to find out about Cobra's true identity. If they did not seize this opportunity, no one knew when the next one would be. Therefore, even if it was extremely dangerous, they had to act. They worked from 11 o'clock in the morning until 1 o'clock in the afternoon to formulate a complete plan. While they were formulating the plan, the scout, Sparrow Hawk, kept an eye on the 8-story building to prevent Cobra from suddenly leaving again. All the escape routes are here at the canal. On the computer, with a city map of Melbourne. With a pen in hand, Xia Jinyuan tapped lightly on the map, pointing out all the escape routes in the north. There are a total of 4 routes from here to the canal. These 4 routes can all be used to evacuate. In a moment, we'll disperse and evacuate separately. We'll gather here at the canal and finish off the target within 6 hours. I won't say how much firepower they have. We can't compete with them in terms of firepower. After the assassination, we'll escape immediately. It won't work even if we fire an extra bullet. That'll expose our position. The opponent's weapons are very sophisticated. Our brothers already know our location. There are many gangs and drug dealers, so they'll provide us with cover. Also, there was an attack outside just now. Cobra's side hasn't made any moves until now. This means that he didn't take it to heart, or it could be said that he knew something like this would happen. What I'm worried about now is that once this is reported internationally, Xia Jinyuan said, then suddenly paused. His deep, dark eyes narrowed slightly. He and V8 evacuated about 15 minutes ago. The police and medical personnel rushed over 10 minutes later, but there were no news personnel present. Could it be that this matter was suppressed by the Melbourne government? Why? Go to the international network and see if there's anything that happened this morning. With that in mind, Xia Jinyuan immediately asked Y Alliance to post it on the international network. If it was not even on the international network, then the matter would most likely be suppressed by the Melbourne government. Fighting between gangs and drug dealers was a common thing in Melbourne. Sometimes the government even liked to see it. 2 big tumors killing each other, the government did not have to put in much effort to get a ready-made result. How could they not be happy? Why quickly enter the international network and browse through all the current international news? There was no mention of the incident at Melbourne's northern market, which meant that the matter was really suppressed by the Melbourne government. It would be easy to suppress this matter. The north was originally a place where gangs and drug dealers gathered. Shooting at the civilians in the market did not last long. After a round of bullets, it did not continue. It did not seem deliberate, but more like it was done on purpose for some people to see. The people of Melbourne were used to this kind of thing happening in the north. After all, their country had one of the highest homicide rates in the world. Today's sudden gunfire was very short. It was like throwing a few small stones into the sea. There was only a small splash at the moment of falling, and after that, everything returned to normal. How could it attract their attention? At the end of the day, the country was too chaotic. It was so chaotic that the civilians thought it was normal to hear gunshots. Chapter 3598. If this had happened in China, it would have been heavily guarded. The special police, armed police, and special forces would have all appeared. But now, at least 10 people had died in the market, and there was no news on the international network. Xia Jinyuan smirked and said to his comrades, "It seems like Cobra won't be leaving anytime soon, but he might not leave after tonight. Q King, do you think he brought his men all the way to the north? Does he have some shady dealings with the gangs or drug dealers in the north? Otherwise, with his cunning and sharpness, he would have run away immediately after something like this happened." Project X raised his doubts. "So he hasn't run away since something happened?" Xia Jinyuan raised his eyebrows. "Are you sure he hasn't left?" His comrades' gazes fell on their captain. If this bastard was going to run away, what were they going to do tonight? Wouldn't they be alerting the enemy? The battle plan I just mentioned is all based on the assumption that Cobra hasn't left. Before the operation, I will confirm whether he has left or not. If he hasn't left, we will start the operation immediately. Also, if I don't come back, don't send the news back to China immediately. If there is still no news from me in 3 days, then spread the news. Has the news of our arrival in the north been sent back to China? Is there a reply from China? His words made the young Special Forces soldiers look particularly serious. Long Eagle pressed his lips and said, "I'll go with you." "No need, I'll go with Q King." G3's gravelly voice was low. Cobra's anti-reconnaissance ability is quite strong. Q King, and I think he used to be a professional soldier. You can only leave the matter of going into us. Only Q King and I have a chance to get close. None of you have a chance. The atmosphere suddenly became much colder. Indeed, only Q King and G3 had the chance to get close. They had even formed teams and took turns to walk around the 8th floor 24 hours a day. The few of them couldn't get close. There was no more debate about who was going to check to see if Cobra was still there. There was nothing to argue about. Just do what was best for the plan. Y checked silently to see if there were any replies in the country and entered a special website. His fingers tapped lightly on the keyboard a few times, and he looked up at Xia Jinyuan from the screen. There's no reply yet. It's midnight in the country now. Maybe there's no time to check. In Melbourne, which was 14 hours later than in China, it was already past 1 p.m. In China, which was almost 14 hours later, it was already past 2 a.m. Yi Qian, who had fallen into a deep sleep at 11 o'clock, suddenly opened his eyes. In the darkness, there were remnants of the nightmare in his jet-black eyes. The hand under the blanket moved slightly, then slowly moved to the position of his heart. There was an inexplicable panic, an inexplicable confusion, and a trace of lingering fear. She had a nightmare that she did not know what kind of nightmare it was. When she woke up, she had completely forgotten what the dream was about. Only her heart was still inexplicably flustered. No longer sleepy, Yi Qian propped himself up against the back of the bed and sat up. He then turned on the table lamp. At that moment, he was no longer sleepy. He picked up the small camouflaged alarm clock on the bedside and fixed his gaze on the time. It was 2:21 p.m. Yi Jian's eyes were so clear that she didn't seem to be sleepy at all. She stared at the ticking minute hand, and the corners of her mouth tightened. Chapter 3599. When her eyes suddenly darkened, she quickly put down the alarm clock in her hand and opened the bedside drawer. She picked up the cell phone in the drawer and dialed a number she had memorized by heart without any hesitation. She had to make this call, no matter what. She was so flustered that she could not care less about the fact that it was already the middle of the night. Ever since Grandpa Jin fell seriously ill and Uncle Chun fell ill, she had always felt this way. But now, the lover she was most worried about was nowhere to be found. She wanted to know if the military had any news of him. She desperately wanted to know. There were 2 people on Yi Qian's cell phone who could directly contact the military. One of them was Boss Yang, and the other was her future father-in-law. Yi Qian was contacting Boss Yang. After all, he was Xia Jinyuan's direct superior. At 2:24 a.m., Major General Yang, who had already gone to bed, took the phone from a guard. At 2:27 a.m., he finished washing up, brushing his teeth, and getting dressed. The guard then drove him all the way to the military headquarters. At the same time, the personnel on duty at the military's Information Management Center received a special English email from Melbourne. There was nothing else in the email, but the numbers and the watermark on the crown immediately let Major General Yang know that it was sent by Xia Jinyuan, who was on a mission. It was sent an hour ago. This email made Major General Yang feel slightly relieved. He first contacted T6, K7, and the others who had gone overseas to provide support. T6 Wu replied that they had already rushed to the north of Melbourne. With this, Major General Yang heaved a sigh of relief. With T6 and the others as backup, the safety of Q King and the others was further guaranteed. The four of you are their last line of defense. While paying attention to your own safety, you must ensure that all of your comrades return safely to their country. This was the order Major General Yang gave to T6 Wu and the others. At the same time, the Information Management Center replied to the special email sent by Xia Jinyuan and the others, informing them that four of their comrades had arrived and would be their last line of defense. After making the arrangements, Major General Yang contacted Yi Qian. Only Yi Qian could alarm a major general into heading to the military headquarters at around 2 a.m. because of a nightmare. From this, it could be seen that Major General Yang trusted Yi Qian's intuition very much. As it turned out, Yi Qian's intuition was right. The 8 people who had lost contact with their country contacted their country at around 1 o'clock in the morning and told them that they were all safe and that there were no problems for the time being. The panic in Yi Qian's heart did not dissipate after hearing their news, but at least she knew that the person she loved deeply was safe for the time being. She also knew that Wu Yu and his comrades, who had suddenly left, had rushed over to support them. There were 12 of them in total, almost half of the Snowfield Brigade strength. At this moment, Yi Qian deeply felt that there were too few ace special forces in the Snowfield Brigade. He could only hope that the recruits who had already entered the Snowfield Brigade could quickly mature and become independent. On the phone, Major General Yang's voice gradually became serious. Relax. Although this mission is dangerous, they're already used to it. Compete well. This is also your mission, and it's not any lighter than theirs. Everyone has their own duties and matters to attend to. Yi Qian, you need to focus. I hope you can compete seriously in the upcoming competition. Don't get distracted. Monfei's omission of an invitation letter was already a sign of discrimination against the Chinese. Before they even left the country, they were already making things difficult for them. Yi Qian, who was holding the phone, took a deep breath before answering. I understand, Major General. I will definitely compete well and not let you down. Chapter 3600. The man she loved dearly shuttled through danger to fight for his mission. As for her, since she went abroad to fight for her mission as well, she hoped that he would return safely and that she would live up to his expectations. Yi Qian did not sleep until dawn. The sky in China was getting brighter, but in Melbourne, which was close to the equator, it was already dark. The market where the tragedy happened during the day had quieted down. After meeting with T6 and K7, Xia Jinyuan began the first step of his plan. Cobra went out halfway, which made Xia Jinyuan's heart skip a beat. It was not until around 5 in the afternoon, when Cobra quietly returned to his original residence, that everyone breathed a sigh of relief. They were now afraid that Cobra would suddenly leave, and this worry gradually increased as the sky darkened and time passed. The closer it was to this point, the more they did not want any trouble to happen. At 9 o'clock in the evening, someone walked into the building. At around 10 o'clock in the evening, the person angrily left with his men. Sparrow Hawk, who was watching closely, told his comrades that the person looked around before leaving and whispered to his subordinates as he walked. At 11 o'clock in the evening, the lights in the building were still on. At around 12 o'clock in the morning, the lights in the room where Cobra painted during the day finally went out. The Snowfield Brigade's operation began. Yi Qian had already boarded the flight to Normandy and began her journey. In Melbourne, the night was so dark that one could not even see their own fingers. Even the street lights in the north had gone on strike. Compared to the bustling central area, there was an additional layer of horror that made people afraid to walk at night. The comrades of the Snowfield Brigade were like leopards searching for food at night, staring coldly at the building in front of them. They were all quietly waiting for Xia Jinyuan's return and for the operation to begin in the early hours of the morning. Cobra returned to his room and did not show up again. No one knew which room he was in. The entire 8-story building was his place, so he could stay in whichever room he wanted. Time passed very slowly, so slow that it seemed that the sky would be bright in a while. When Xia Jinyuan's low voice came from the microphone, the hidden special forces soldiers' eyes flashed with hostility. Move! After confirming that Cobra had not left, Xia Jinyuan led his soldiers and his comrades to carry out a cleanup operation. The 6 of them sneaked into the building and locked onto the 6th floor. They used their best assassination skills, quietly covering the mouths of the people guarding the corridor and twisting their necks, swiftly finishing them off. The Snowfield Brigade Special Forces, who were dressed exactly like these people, took over their patrol duties. If one only looked at the background and did not look at the front, one would not be able to tell anything. The 6 of them worked together to eliminate the assassination targets outside one by one. Young Sparrow Hawk, who was guarding outside, reported the latest news. You guys hide for a while. Someone wants to make a move. I saw an acquaintance that I met last night. The guy who left angrily at 10 o'clock. One of his subordinates is sitting in the car. As soon as he finished speaking, he heard the sound of a car coming to a screeching halt, followed by a barrage of gunshots. Bang, bang, bang. Bang, bang, bang. The gunshots completely broke the silence of the night. The Special Forces soldiers, who had just taken action, heard the hurried but orderly footsteps in the building, and a trace of solemnity appeared in their eyes. The gunshots were sudden, but Cobra's men did not panic at all. It was obvious that they were prepared and even seemed to be waiting for this moment to arrive. The windows of the closed rooms were all opened. Then, young Sparrow Hawk saw a heavy machine gun, and in an instant, the 3 cars below were turned into a beehive. Chapter 36:01. Cobra was well prepared and ruthless. It was as if he knew in advance that someone would sneak up on him, so he made preparations in advance, making the person who tried to sneak up on him regret it. After Yao Zi reported the situation outside, Xia Jinyuan, who had already sneaked into the building, became even more serious. Cobra was a guy who was more difficult to deal with than any of the previous assassination targets. He was always ready for battle and didn't let his guard down 24 hours a day. Stay calm, don't rush out. In the dark, Xia Jinyuan's low voice traveled into the ears of all his comrades. He is more prepared than we thought. The biggest problem in front of the Snowfield Brigade was they couldn't determine which room Cobra was in. They could only guess that his room was on the 6th floor based on their observation during the day. How many rooms were there on the 6th floor? Based on the floor plan, there were a total of 9 rooms on the 6th floor. During the day, they observed him painting on the balcony of the suite on the 6th floor. Then, would he still be in this suite at night? Even Xia Jinyuan couldn't confirm. Cobra's whereabouts were unpredictable, and he rarely showed up. After sneaking into the underground market for so long, they had only seen Cobra's back once, and this was the 2nd time. They only saw him twice a month, and they didn't know when they would see him again. Faced with this situation, the Special Forces of the Snowfield Brigade could only seize the opportunity to complete their assassination mission every time they saw Cobra. This kind of assassination was full of uncertainties, and there were too many dangers involved. They couldn't miss this opportunity, so they had to be more careful. Xia Jinyuan knew that tonight's operation was very dangerous, so even if he sneaked into the building to monitor, he only had G3 as his comrade. Now, he had 6 comrades. Facing a guy who was ready for battle at any time, Xia Jinyuan, with his back against the wall, said in a low voice, "You guys stay alert, I'll go scout. I'll go with you." G3, who was right next to him, said without hesitation. It was better to have two people scouting together than one person. If something really happened, they could immediately cover and retreat. Xia Jinyuan looked at G3 and thought for a while before he nodded. Young Sparrow Hawk tightened his grip on his gun and said in a low voice, "We'll be outside, and the T6 combatants will be at the back. Brothers inside, don't worry. We'll hold the fort outside for you." Everyone knew that Cobra's exact location couldn't be determined. Everyone knew that once they entered, it would be the most dangerous time for them to pull out their guns. So, if it really came to that, they would have to rely on their brothers outside for support. The Special Forces of the Snowfield Brigade would never let their comrades shoulder the danger alone. They were so used to sharing danger with each other. Cobra's people and the guys who came out of nowhere had escalated their firepower. They were shooting from above and throwing grenades at the entrance of the building. The sound of gunfire and bombs mixed together, causing the surrounding civilians to tremble in fear. They had already experienced the scare during the day, but who knew that the danger was not over yet? The gunfire in the middle of the night caused many people to hug each other tightly. In the darkness, their eyes revealed deep fear. They were scared, lost, and helpless, but no one came to help them. They could only rely on themselves and the warmth of their families to get through the long and torturous time. Chapter 3602. The elderly knelt in front of the statue of the Virgin Mary. They prayed for the disaster to pass quickly and for the Virgin Mary to protect them. They bowed deeply and prostrated themselves on the ground for safety. Boom! A series of huge explosions rang out. The grenades made the entire building tremble. However, Cobra did not move at all. She did not show up at all. It was as if she had already left. The electrical circuit of the entire building had been blown up. In the darkness, Xia Jinyuan and G3 were the first to move. They did not have any bulletproof equipment on them. They only had an automatic rifle in their hands that they had obtained through special channels. They only had a combat dagger on them. Not all missions required them to wear a combat uniform and carry a lot of weapons. Not all missions required them to be well-armed. Most of the special missions required them to be lightly armed. And this time it was the case. With years of tacit understanding, the two men slowly approached the room where Cobra appeared during the day in the darkness. The straight corridor was very quiet, but gunshots kept coming from the room facing the market. These were all from Cobra's men shooting down from the window. The firepower was so strong that half the sky seemed to be dyed red. As they got closer to the room where Cobra appeared during the day, Xia Jinyuan gently raised his hand and pulled G3. In the darkness, they could see four figures walking back and forth not far in front of them. Through the faint darkness of the night, they could faintly see that they were holding weapons in their hands. The two men stuck close to the wall and quickly hid behind the doorframe. Xia Jinyuan lightly wrote a few words on G3's palm. G3 nodded lightly and was in charge of guarding. Xia Jinyuan slowly turned the door lock behind him. With a gentle twist, he knew that the door was not locked from the inside. Soon, the closed door was gently pushed open. Just as the door was pushed open a small crack, the sound of gunshots suddenly came from the room. Xia Jinyuan did not move slowly anymore. He quickly flashed in. Just as the sound of gunshots came from a room, two of the four figures that needed to be dealt with suddenly walked over. They heard the sound of gunshots coming from the closed room. It was such a small sound that alerted them, and they quickly approached. G3 pushed the door open the moment they walked over. The sound of gunshots in the room clearly traveled to the corridor. "Get out here!" In the darkness, a man's violent growl could be heard. At the same time, the sound of two bullets being loaded could be heard. They had already raised the guns in their hands and were ready to shoot at any time. In the room, G3 and Xia Jinyuan took care of two guys who were shooting down with submachine guns. The room was very empty, and there wasn't even a place to hide. The moment the two bodyguards pushed the door open and walked in, the two had already pushed the two guys out of the window of the 6th floor. Then, the two picked up their submachine guns and started shooting down the market. The door was opened, and a bodyguard took a look. Then he asked in perfect English with a cold tone, "Who just walked out of the room?" G3 replied, "It's me." I think I heard gunshots outside the room. I was worried, so I came out to take a look. The same standard English answers were given. The faces of these people could be seen clearly in the dim light of the night. These people were not Mellabon locals, but Cobra's bodyguards. They were all European and American men. Chapter 36:03. After getting the answer, the bodyguard glanced gloomily at the empty room. Then his gaze fell on the two people who were fighting with those bug-like guys outside. He seemed to have some doubts, but he couldn't find any problems. He stood at the door and didn't leave immediately, nor did he come in. A bullet hit the upper beam of the window and penetrated deeply, leaving only the tail. Xia Jinyuan suddenly screamed and fell to the ground, curling up. Damn it! He's been shot. Hurry up and help him out, hurry. These damn bastards, I'm going to kill them, I'm going to kill them. G3, who was cursing loudly, ignored Xia Jinyuan on the ground. Instead, he picked up another gun, placed both guns on the windowsill, and fired 2 straight shots. Finally, the bodyguard standing at the door walked over. He smelled blood in the smoke, and it was the familiar smell of blood that made him quicken his pace. He bent down and picked up Xia Jinyuan, who had fallen to the ground. The moment he got up, he felt something cold brushing against his neck. Then, he felt a sharp pain. The battle with Cobra's bodyguard began at this moment. Xia Jinyuan, who had successfully lured the enemy and completed the assassination, used his arm to support the man who was bleeding from his neck and making a strange gurgling sound. Fortunately, he was tall enough to support the Western man steadily. Xia Jinyuan and his men were too good at doing this. The bodyguard at the door didn't notice anything strange at all. The man was still breathing and was still trying to struggle. The bodyguard covered his neck with one hand, and it looked like he was supporting Xia Jinyuan, which didn't serve as a warning at all. Xia Jinyuan would never give the other party a chance to warn him, especially when the other party struggled and used a grappling technique. This was the grappling technique of the Western Army. In other words, this bodyguard was a professional soldier. At this moment, Xia Jinyuan's eyes were cold. Cobra's fighting style was that of a professional soldier, and he had a high level of anti-reconnaissance skills. He was extremely cunning, and his bodyguard was also a professional soldier. Then, what kind of power was behind Cobra? Would everything be fine if he got rid of Cobra? No, absolutely not. The only way is to cut off the forces behind Cobra, so that they won't dare to extend their hands into our country. I'm going to Cobra's side. All of you, retreat and wait for my news. Also, tell Qing Niao that I'll contact her. Tell her to wait for me. I will come back alive to see her. This was the last time G3 and their comrades in the assassination mission heard their Q King's voice. Their captain's voice was steady and powerful, and it was so heroic that it made everyone's hearts fall from the sky into the abyss. By the canal, T6, K7, G3, X, Y, and so on had a total of 9 comrades. Only their captain was not there. Where is he? Where is he? Where did he go? Why didn't you wait for him to come back? The T6 combatant could see the seriousness on his comrades' faces that made his limbs turn cold. He grabbed G3's collar tightly with both hands and growled fiercely. If you're with him, why didn't he come back? Why? Let go. K7, who was closest to T6, gripped T6 with Yu's wrist tightly. He could see that T6 was so agitated that the veins on his neck were bulging out. The hostility in his eyes was like a raging tornado on the surface of the sea. It was as though he would destroy this place at any moment. K7 gripped his wrist tightly and said word by word, "If you want to know why, you have to let go and let G3 speak. Let go, T6." Chapter 36:04. Among all his comrades, only T6 and K7 did not hear Xia Jinyuan's last words. They did not know what had happened. The evening breeze of the Melbourne Canal blew in their faces. G3's slow and heavy voice drifted into everyone's ears along with the wind. Cobra was a professional soldier, and his bodyguards were also professional soldiers. Q King realized that the power behind Cobra was not what the current investigation showed. Compared to assassinating Cobra, he hoped that the power behind Cobra would never have the guts to reach into our country again. What is the power behind Cobra? Which countries are involved? How much do they know about our country? How many spies do they have in our country? These are the questions that Q King wants to find out. He said that he would definitely come back alive. He also asked me to tell Qing Niao that she must wait for him to come back. He knew that he might not be able to come back alive, but this was the best opportunity to get close to Cobra directly. Xia Jinyuan, who knew his mission and duty well, did not give himself a way out. Between survival and duty, he chose duty. He had the courage to face death and the wisdom to fight for survival. He said that he would definitely come back alive. Then, they would all wait for him to come back. But how long would they have to wait? No one knew. That night, the wind of the Melbourne Canal was very cold. The cold wind blew into their bones, and even their warm hearts were covered with a thin layer of frost. At 4 o'clock in the morning in Melbourne, Y sent their latest news back to China. At that time, it was already 3 o'clock in the afternoon in China. Information Security once again received a very strange email. After deciphering it, it was printed out. 10 minutes later, Major General Yang received the deciphered paper document. Major General Yang, who had been waiting for news from Melbourne, saw the deciphered message on the document. His face suddenly turned pale. When Commander-in-Chief Xia found out, he sat in his chair and stared at the words. Commander-in-Chief Xia, who appeared calm on the surface, slowly put the thin paper back into the folder. Then, he slowly put his hands under the desk. The moment he put them down, his hands clenched into fists. Tell them to return to China immediately and wait for news from their captain. Commander-in-Chief Xia instructed Major General Yang. Major General Yang closed his eyes slightly. When he was about to speak again, his voice trembled slightly. Since some of them have infiltrated the underground market, why don't we? He didn't ask his comrades to stay behind and listen to his arrangements. He asked everyone to retreat. Commander-in-Chief Xia raised his head and looked at Major General Yang calmly. I believe in a Yuan's ability. Since he promised to come back alive, he will definitely come back alive. They will return home first and wait for news from him. Major General Yang didn't obey the order immediately. He stood there for a long time, struggling with himself for a while before he nodded gently. Okay. After the okay, Commander-in-Chief Xia lowered his head. His eyes were still looking at the deciphered words. His clenched hands under the office slowly loosened. Then, he said calmly, Yi Qian needs to participate in the competition. I'll tell her when she returns home. Yi Qian, who was also in a foreign country, had arrived in Monfei. When she got out of the car, a sudden palpitation almost made her faint. Li Jingyan, who was standing at the door of the car, saw her face suddenly turn pale and immediately supported her. This scene happened to be seen by the Korean students who got out of the other car. Seeing this, a contemptuous smile flashed across their eyes. Chapter 36:05. The two siblings did not notice the gazes of the Korean students. Li Jingyan had already noticed that his sister's complexion was not very good these 2 days. Others might not be able to tell, but as her brother, he could tell that she was in low spirits. She did not say why she was in such a bad mood, and he could not guess it either. The Monfei military personnel who were supposed to receive the Chinese students had not arrived yet, and this was Monfei's military restricted area. Even the invited students were not allowed to walk around freely. They had to be led by the Monfei military personnel. The Korean students who arrived at the restricted area around the same time had already been received by 3 Monfei military personnel. They spoke fluent English and warmly welcomed the arrival of the Korean students. However, no one from the Chinese side came over. It was as if they had been forgotten again. Behind them, the Korean students and the Monfei military personnel were chatting happily. On the other side, the Chinese students each held their own luggage and lined up neatly. They were not affected at all, as if they were not bothered by being left out. What was there to be bothered about? They could even forget about the invitation, so it was not strange that no personnel came out to receive them. On the day of departure, they were already mentally prepared. Even 2 senior officers came out to tell them not to be arrogant, not to be rash, not to be angry, and not to complain. When it was time to make a move, there was no need to be polite. At this time, they did not pay attention to where the Monfei military personnel were. Their gazes fell on Yi Qian, who had almost tripped when getting off the car. Standing in a line, they did not rush up to show concern for Yi Qian. Each of them stood as straight as a pine tree, piercing through the clouds. When the 16 Korean students saw this, their eyes flashed. Their instructors clapped their hands and ordered their students to stand properly. Even if they stood properly now, they had already lost in terms of discipline and self-discipline. Li Jinyan supported Yi Qian steadily. Seeing that even her lips were pale and his cold eyes were slightly tense, he asked, "Are you feeling unwell? Were you feeling unwell?" Yi Qian, whose chest was throbbing with palpitations, opened her mouth and wanted to reply, "I'm fine." However, it was as if she had lost her voice. She could only open her mouth, but could not make a sound. Li Jinyan's heart tightened. He said in a low voice, "Pass your luggage to the other students. Lean on me and rest." Was she unable to speak when she wanted to? Yi Qian, who had lost his voice, was afraid that his brother would be even more worried, so the corners of his mouth curled up slightly. At the same time, he leaned his entire body against Li Jinyan. She was fine. She was just feeling a little uncomfortable. She would be fine after a while. Zhang Minghong took over the luggage in his hand. The palpitation only lasted for an instant, but quickly disappeared, leaving behind only the lingering fear. The students all noticed Yi Qian's strange behavior and stared at Yi Qian worriedly. Yi Qian, whose face was drained of blood, took a deep breath. Just as he was about to speak, he heard a few chilling laughs coming from behind him. Then, he heard a foreign language exchange. Yi Qian did not understand Korean and did not know what they were talking about. However, for some reason, he felt that the chilling laughs and the exchange were directed at the Chinese students. Yi Qian did not turn around. Now that her palpitation was no longer as painful, she did not let Li Jinyan support her. After standing up straight, she gently cleared her throat. Her voice could flow out normally from her throat again. Li Jinyan, whose heart was tense, finally let out a sigh of relief. Chapter 36:06. Yi Qian smiled and said, "I'm fine. I didn't sleep on the plane last night, so I felt a little nauseous." "You didn't sleep much last night, and neither did I." The third-year senior, Zhang Minghong, held Yi Qian's luggage and said softly, "Since we're here, we have to rest well. When the staff comes, we can go back to our rooms and take a nap to recover our energy." He didn't sleep the whole night, and after the plane ride, the journey was bumpy, so he felt a little nauseous. Yi Qian, who was slowly recovering, didn't rely on Li Jinyan anymore. At this moment, the 16 Korean military students, led by 3 Monfei military staff, had reached the Chinese students and were about to walk past them. Just as they were about to walk past, the Korean instructor suddenly opened his mouth and whispered something in Korean. Then, the 16 Korean Military Academy students all stopped and stood in front of the Chinese Military Academy students. Yi Qian saw this and retreated to stand with Tianqin. "I'm okay. You looked so pale just now, I was shocked," Tianqin said softly with a face full of fear. "You looked like you were going to faint in the next second. Even your lips were pale. Luckily, Instructor Li was quick enough to catch you. Otherwise, you would have fallen from the car." She was still a little nervous, afraid that Yi Qian would feel unwell in the next second. Yi Qian knew that his condition had worried the students who had fought side by side with him. He said apologetically, "I'm sorry to have made you guys worry. I'm fine now. It's good that you're fine. None of us can fall at this time." Tianqin smiled at Yi Qian. She had a quiet personality, and when she smiled, a pair of deep dimples appeared on her cheeks, making her look more lively. "Those Korean students said that we were too weak to stand up to the wind." "Huh. Let's see who's the one who is too weak to stand up to the wind." Tianqin's grandmother was from Chaonan. She was raised by her grandmother since she was young, so she could speak Korean fluently. Yi Qian blinked and replied with a smile, "Of course, we have to let them know that the chief said that we can't be polite. We have to act when it's time." "You're aware," Jiang Yang, who was standing next to Tianqin, said in a low voice. "The instructor from Korea is ready to talk to Li Jinyan. Isn't he raising his chin a little too high? The Korean instructor raised his chin and stood in front of Li Jinyan. He smiled and said, "Hello, I'm Jin Zhongzai. Nice to meet you." He modestly stretched out his hand and said, "I hope you can give me some advice in the next competition." Li Jinyan looked at the Korean instructor, who was smiling, but his eyes were looking down at him. He reached out his hand and nodded with his chin. He said calmly, "Hello, I'm Li Jinyan. Nice to meet you." His fluent and pure English was cold and elegant. Even the way he shook hands was very elegant. In an instant, it was so practical that it made one of the Korean female students gasp lightly. She whispered to another female student in a low voice. Every participating country had to have at least 2 female students. This was the hard and fast rule of the competition. All countries had to abide by it. Korea had 2 female students. It was the same for China. Li Jinyan didn't intend to have too much interaction with the Korean instructor, but the other party obviously didn't think so. He wanted to continue talking to the Chinese instructor. He looked at Yi Qian and said worriedly, "Your female student doesn't seem to be feeling well. Is it because she's scared?" Chapter 36:07. Kim Jong from Korea was the first to express his unfriendliness. Although he looked concerned, he was too hypocritical, so much so that Li Jinyan didn't even bother to expose his hypocritical concern. His thin lips curled slightly. Demon King Li, who didn't like to smile, showed his elegant and polite side. "My body is indeed a little unwell. I need to rest for a while." "Then you must rest well. Fortunately, it's only unwell. If you're afraid, that would be terrible." Kim Jong's smile became even more fake in front of the instructor. His small and narrow eyes flashed with disdain, and his tone was even more considerate of the Chinese students. Participating in such a large-scale competition for the first time will indeed make people feel pressured, especially when I heard that your country only received the invitation a month ago. Presumably, you haven't prepared well. It's normal for your students to feel pressured. Our instructors should counsel them well. How could a student from a poor country not be afraid when he had never seen such a big scene before? Unwell was a very good and perfect excuse. But who would believe it? The Chinese had shown their national and military strength to the world during that grand ceremony. Since then, they have been active in the international arena, afraid that other countries wouldn't know that they had developed their own weapons. What a joke. How could a country with so much land and so little resources want to become the #1 country in Asia? How laughable. The Korean students were already laughing softly. A female student tilted her head and looked Yi Qian up and down without hiding her gaze. Finally, her gaze fell on Yi Qian's face, and she smiled to the student beside her. The Chinese female student is very beautiful. She's like a porcelain in a display case. You can't touch her. You can only look at her. She was speaking in their own language, but her gaze was always on Yi Qian. Obviously, she was taking advantage of the fact that the Chinese students couldn't hear their language, so she didn't avoid it. When Tianqin heard this, she first looked at Li Jinyan. After the instructor nodded, she smiled in very standard Korean and said, "You're also very beautiful. You're like a flower growing in a greenhouse. You can't touch her. You can only look at her." Not to mention anything else, the concept didn't even need to be changed. Tianqin beautifully countered the other party, a tooth for a tooth. The female student didn't expect that there would be a Chinese student who could understand their language. She didn't say anything after being rebutted. Instead, she looked at Tianqin warily. Another female student standing beside her spoke in a low voice. At this moment, they could no longer use their normal voices to converse. Instead, they lowered their voices so that the Chinese students couldn't hear them. Their instructor, Jin Zhong, narrowed his eyes slightly and looked at Li Jinyan with a somewhat gloomy expression. The students sent by the Chinese side were a bit difficult to deal with. It was very different from what they had expected. The short exchange had already made him faintly feel that it was not easy to deal with. Not staying any longer, Jin Zhongzai's instructor immediately left with his students. They needed to adjust their strategy. The Korean students who had left with their instructors had already started talking to each other. I really didn't expect that students from a poor country would have the guts to stand in front of us and speak. It seems that they have been educated to the point that they don't know the strength of our country. Do you expect all of them to be as open-minded as us in a country that is so poor in material things? No, I don't expect that at all. I even hope that they can continue to be so ignorant and continue to be citizens of their poor country. Chapter 3608. This time, they had purposely lowered their voices when communicating with each other, thinking that the Chinese students could not understand their language. But in the end, a Chinese student rushed out and spoke in fluent Korean, causing their temples to throb. Inexplicably, they felt threatened. Gather later. We need to adjust our strategy against the Chinese students. The leader who had finished talking to the instructor had a dark expression. He said to the students, "The instructor said that the Chinese students won't be as easy to deal with as we expected. We need to adjust our strategy." The Chinese students wouldn't be as easy to deal with as they expected. The female student, who had already suffered at the hands of Tian Qin, agreed. She said that the female student, who was prettier than their country celebrities, was like a piece of porcelain that would break at the slightest touch. She implied that she only had looks but couldn't withstand a single blow. Who knew? The female student bit her lower lip, and a trace of humiliation flashed in her eyes. Who knew that the Chinese students would counterattack, that she was a flower that grew in a greenhouse? Other than being pretty, she was useless. She thought that even if the Chinese students knew what she was implying, they would swallow their anger. A student from a poor country with nothing had no confidence at all, who knew that they would immediately counterattack, making her lose face. The female student who felt humiliated said, "That's right. They look very arrogant. Arrogant people are either very powerful and have the right to be arrogant, or they're just using arrogant words and actions to hide their incompetence." Then do you think the Chinese students are the former or the latter? A male student asked seriously. The female student looked back slightly. The Monfei military staff hadn't gone over to receive the Chinese students. They could all see that they were being negligent. However, the Chinese students weren't affected at all. Led by their so handsome that he looked like a celebrity, all of them stood like pine trees in the snow. It was enough to make people ignore everything else. I choose the former. The Chinese students are well-trained. They didn't show any anger when they were neglected by the Monfei military staff. Their psychological quality is very strong. The female student answered. The male student smiled and said, "It's just to maintain the last bit of dignity. If they lose their last bit of dignity, then China will become an international joke. In order to maintain their dignity, they have to do this." His words were full of arrogance, and he used his actions and words to express his contempt for the Chinese side. Ever since he was a child, he knew that China was a poor country where people could not even afford to wear clothes or eat fruits. He had also seen domestic news reports. The mountains in China were very high, but there were no roads. Therefore, the people there were very, very poor. They had no clothes to wear, no fruits to eat, and even the houses were made of grass and mud. The only rich places were the few big cities in their country. Other than that, everyone else was very poor. He was not the only student who thought of China this way. There were several other students. Among the 16 students, there were already several students who thought of China this way. One could imagine how many people in their countries thought of China this way. On this matter, Li Jinyin said to the 16 students in front of him, "Next time you see those who need to be taught a lesson, teach them how to be a good person. We can't let them choose to reincarnate again. We can only choose to educate them." Chapter 3609. In the hearts of the High Hun students, Instructor Li didn't like to laugh, scold, or talk much. His image was like a towering snow mountain. Looking at him from afar was enough to make them respect him. But today, when he suddenly said such a sentence, the Navy cadets were so shocked that their eyes widened. Did their Instructor Li play a joke just now? Did they hear it wrong? Did they see it wrong? They didn't hallucinate, did they? No. The students from the other 3 academies who didn't have much contact with Li Jinyan all pursed their lips, letting the laughter roll back and forth in their chests. As for Yi Qian, she was the one who knew her brother the best. Hearing this, she was first stunned like the students of a naval academy, but she reacted quickly. After being stunned for a few seconds, she laughed softly. They couldn't choose to reincarnate again. They could only choose to educate them. This time, it was rare for Big Brother to say it, but it was normal for Captain Xia to say it. Captain Xia, suddenly thinking of this, Yi Qian's smile faded a lot. The person she cared about, was he in an unprecedented danger? Was he trying to get out of his predicament? Was he holding on to his beliefs, never turning back, even if he had to sacrifice himself? The man she loved deeply held up the sky for her, filled her life with fresh colors. Now, she didn't know where he was, but she was waiting for him to come back. Even if he was in an unprecedented danger, even if he couldn't get out of his predicament immediately, she believed that he would hold on to his beliefs and be fearless of sacrifice. He would find a way to come back alive, because she was waiting for him to come back. The rest of the students who were laughing because of Li Jinyan's words didn't notice Yi Qian's strange expression. The only one who noticed was Li Jinyan. He saw the deep smile in her eyes suddenly fade a lot. There was something suppressed in the depths of her eyes, like the thickest of inky haze. It was so heavy that it made it hard for people to breathe. His only sister had something very important to hide from him. Li Jinyan couldn't help but press the corner of his mouth. The Monfei military staff who received the Chinese students finally appeared. As the electric gate slowly opened, 3 staff members strode over. "Sorry, I'm really sorry. I had something urgent to deal with at the last minute. Sorry to have kept you waiting." A staff member in charge explained while wiping his sweat. Other than that, he didn't say anything else. Some people took it for granted that the Chinese students would forgive them after hearing their explanation. Li Jinyan glanced at them and said nothing. He led the students to Monfei's restricted military area. The 3 Monfei staff members were obviously stunned for a moment. Then, they saw the students in their tailored military uniforms walk past them. They didn't even look at them as they walked inside. "Hey, wait, we still need to verify your identities and information. You can't go in immediately." The head of the staff immediately turned around to stop him. "Please cooperate with our work." "Thank you." Seeing this, the other 2 staff members hurriedly stopped him. Li Jinyan stopped. His cold gaze fell lightly on the face of the Monfei military staff member who was slightly shorter than him. Because he was tall, when he looked over, his eyelids were lowered very slightly. It was like a king looking down on his subjects. His aura was oppressive. Chapter 36:10. Li Jinyan's aura was different from Xia Jinyuan's. When Xia Jinyuan was not smiling, he was as deep as the ocean, and no one knew what would happen in the next second. On the other hand, Li Jinyan was someone who did not like to smile. No matter what, he was like a towering snow mountain at the end of the sky, looking down at the surroundings with a biting cold aura. At this moment, he only looked at the staff member who stopped them with a cold expression. Before he could speak, the staff member felt as if the air around him had solidified into a mountain, slowly pressing down on his head, making his back, which should have been straight, bend little by little. In the end, the staff member did not dare to look directly at Li Jinyan. His entire expression was very stiff, and one could tell at a glance that he was not at ease at all at this time. He looked away guiltily and did not dare to look directly at Zhang Ziyan. When the other 2 staff members saw this, they wanted to take a tougher attitude and asked the Chinese staff member to cooperate. Li Jinyan, who had been pressuring them with his eyes, finally opened his mouth. As soon as he opened his mouth, the 3 Monfei staff members who did not dare to look directly at him breathed a sigh of relief. They thought that the Chinese staff member had given in to them, and a trace of pride appeared on their faces. Then, Li Jinyan's words made their expressions stiffen again. "Aren't you very busy? If you're so busy that you don't have time to receive us, why do you have time to check our identities and information? Also, just now, didn't you recognize which country we are from a glance? Since you've recognized us, and you're so busy, you can skip this step and go to your own things." As for our identities and information, I'll let the competition committee verify it. There's no need to trouble the three of you. Monfei wasn't the only country on the competition committee. There were also committee members from other countries. Li Jinyin directly brought up the competition committee, causing panic to appear in the eyes of the three Monfei military personnel who had deliberately neglected them. They just wanted to add a little pressure to the Chinese students, but they didn't want to alarm the competition committee. Hearing this, the Monfei military staff smiled awkwardly and found an excuse for himself. No, there is no need to alarm the competition committee. We can check it ourselves. The Korean students who had just passed by were Monfei's military personnel. They had brought their own information to verify their identities. It was normal for them to enter the other party's restricted military zone to verify their identities. What was wrong was that in order to suppress the Chinese students, they did not even do their job properly. It was unreasonable for them to ask the Chinese students to take the initiative to verify their identities with them. It seemed very simple, but in fact, it was not simple at all. Going to verify his identity was akin to showing up uninvited. Li Jinyin had already tolerated the fact that the invitation letter was left behind. Now that he was rejected at the door, Li Jinyin couldn't tolerate it anymore. Inviting a member of the competition committee to verify the identity of the Chinese side was undoubtedly letting the committee members of the other countries know that Monfei's military was incompetent and could not take on big responsibilities. If the International Times reported it, Monfei would lose face. Not only did they fail to embarrass the Chinese side, but they also alarmed the competition committee. Monfei's military had directly lost face internationally. The Monfei military staff did not dare to be negligent. They hurriedly invited the Chinese students in, and there was a thin layer of sweat on their backs. The Chinese students and the Chinese instructor were not to be trifled with. This was the first impression of the Korean instructor and the Monfei military staff of the Chinese team. Chapter 36:11. After passing through the restricted military zone, they received armbands that recorded their nationality and identity. They stayed in the barracks arranged for the participating students of all countries. They would stay there for as long as the competition lasted. The Chinese students, who had been embarrassed twice, were not affected at all. They fought back beautifully. The ones who were affected were the other party. Rest early tonight. If there are students from other countries who come to interact with you, don't be afraid. Just interact normally. You can also take the initiative to interact with students from other countries. Students from top military schools like West Point, St. Cyr, Phalongzi, and Cranwell can all interact with them. As for students from Korea, greet them politely when you see them. There's no need to interact too deeply. It's easy to learn bad things, but hard to learn good things. I'm afraid you'll learn their arrogance and narrow-mindedness. The students of a naval academy still couldn't get used to seeing the serious instructor Li make jokes twice in a row in one day. But Yi Qian already knew that her brother was deliberately doing this to make the students relax. He was not really cold-hearted, just used to it. The students were all in bunk beds with 4 people. Yi Qian and Tianqin were also in bunk beds with 4 people. When they pushed the door open, Yi Qian and Tianqin saw the 2 female students already in the room. Their eyes flashed. It was really enemies were bound to meet. The Chinese female students were assigned to the same room as the Korean female students. The Korean female students who arrived early saw the Chinese characters on the bedside and knew that they would be staying with the Chinese female students for the next few days. They did not want to stay with the Chinese female students, so they immediately applied. Instructor Kim Jong-jae was also afraid that the female students from his country would be affected, so he reported it as a very serious matter. In the end, it was not out yet. They did not know if they could successfully apply for a change of rooms. When the Korean female students saw Yi Qian and Tianqin, they only looked up and nodded slightly. It was considered a greeting. Yi Qian and Tianqin also nodded slightly. They put their luggage on the bedside and began to unpack. There was not much luggage. 2 sets of combat uniforms, 2 pairs of combat boots, 2 thick and thin backpacks. Other than that, there was nothing else, not even toiletries. It was written in detail on the invitation letter. Other than the combat uniforms of each country, everything else would be provided, so there was no need to bring anything. The two of them tidied up quickly and lightly. In less than 2 to 3 minutes, they were done. The Korean female students did not move. Their luggage was still properly placed on the bed. Seeing the Chinese female students tidying up their things, one of the Korean female students sniffed and rolled her eyes. She whispered to the other female student who had been stabbed by Tianqin, "What an unbearable existence. If I don't change her, my mood for the next week will be affected. Let's talk outside." The female students who had been stabbed were very wary of Tianqin. The Chinese students could understand their conversation, but they themselves could not understand the conversation between the Chinese students. The language barrier troubled her. Tianqin was a pilot from the Air Force Academy. She was excellent in all aspects. She would board the fighter jet with the official pilots when she went to the Air Force base. She had a steady personality. When she heard the words of the Korean female students, a cold light flashed in her eyes. Chapter 36:12. Yi Qian didn't understand Korean, but she could hear the disgust in the Korean students' voices. The Korean students were unfriendly to the Chinese students. Similarly, she didn't like the Korean students. Although she didn't dare to make friends in her previous life and didn't dare to show her face, she had more or less heard about the news about the Korean students. With the bad memories she had of the Korean students in her previous life, first impressions were the strongest in this life. She didn't like the Korean students either. Now that the other party had expressed their unfriendliness, it was a good opportunity for her to express her unfriendliness openly. There was no need to hide it. Therefore, Yi Qian was quite happy to see the Korean students being unfriendly. Hearing the disgust in the Korean female students' whispers, Yi Qian curled up the corners of her mouth slightly. She suppressed the darkness in her eyes, and the fierceness hidden in the depths of her eyes faintly faded until it disappeared. There were many countries that looked down on the Chinese. She had participated in 2 international competitions, so she was used to it. How to make these people shut up or be afraid wasn't just a matter of words. She had to show some actions. The Korean students. She made a mental note of them. The Korean students whose names were recorded by Yi Qian had already walked to the door. They felt a chill run down their spines and turned their heads at the same time. They saw that the 2 Chinese female students were busy with their own things. They didn't even give them a glance as they walked out. Are they pretending to be virtuous? What a joke. We don't even want to see them. The female student with the flat nose was a little angry. A citizen from a poor country was more arrogant than them. What a joke. Why did they have to be arrogant? Was it because of their large territory, large population, and poverty that made them arrogant? What a joke. Whether they want to see us or not, it's true that we don't want to live with them. Let's go find Instructor Kim first. Although the Korean female student with delicate features was afraid of Tianqin, she still couldn't calm down. She raised her voice and said, "We don't have to put up with people we don't like." Tianqin, who had finished tidying everything up, looked at the 2 people who were about to leave the room with a smile. Yes, there's really no need for that. A person who doesn't even know the most basic manners won't be welcomed anywhere. We have always been humble and polite, but we don't like people who don't even have basic manners. What do you mean? The Korean girl with the flat nose was instantly enraged. Are you saying that we don't even have the most basic manners? What a joke. Your country's etiquette is based on ours. In the end, what did you learn? I only learned arrogance. The infuriated Korean girl said a bunch of things that Yi Qian couldn't hear. Tianqin translated for Yi Qian as fast as she could. Yi Qian's eyebrows curved into crescents as he listened to the translation. Looks like they didn't learn much about official history, but learned a lot about unofficial history. In her previous life, she didn't like Korea because there was a news report that said that Confucius was a Korean. It also said that China, the Gulf, and Japan had been in Korea's territory for a long time. What was even more shocking was that they also said that the ancestors of Korea first established the country of Hung and ruled the Eurasian continent, with the Tian Shan Mountain as the center of today's Chinese territory. Later on, a branch of the people of Hung migrated to the west and created the ancient Egyptian and Babylonian civilizations. Another branch created the ancient Indian civilization. Another branch moved to the southeast and created the Yellow River civilization. Then another branch moved to the northeast and finally reached America. Chapter 36:13. In short, the ancestors of Korea created the four universal civilizations. Without their ancestors, there would not be the four universal civilizations of today. In her previous life, Yi Qian had been running for her life to survive. She did not have the time to pay attention to other things. Even when it came to national affairs, she did not pay much attention to them. Even so, she knew about these things in Korea. It could be seen how ridiculous the unofficial history of Korea was. When Tianqin heard this, she smiled and replied in fluent Korean, "It seems that your country needs to learn about history. Only by looking at history can you be more broad-minded and accept all the rivers in the world." Accepting all rivers was spoken in Chinese. It cannot be helped. There was no such thing as accepting all rivers in Korean. Even now, Koreans still had to pronounce it in Chinese. I hope you can understand accepting all rivers and understand its true meaning. I really want to say it in your country's language, but forgive me for not being able to do so. I have no way of saying our Chinese idiom in your language. Tianqin's reply was neither servile nor overbearing. There was no obvious sharpness in her tone, but what she said was enough to make the Korean female students even angrier. The female student with the flat nose was furious. She had been standing at the door when she suddenly rushed into the room. It was as if she wanted to fight with Tianqin. Yi Qian stepped forward and protected Tianqin behind him. He looked coldly at the Korean female student who seemed to have been humiliated and reminded her, "Be careful not to slip. It will be very painful if you fall." The atmosphere suddenly became tense and tense. The female student who charged overstood in front of Yi Qian. She gritted her teeth and said angrily, "Apologize. You have humiliated our country. Apologize to me. First of all, I'm only telling you to go back and study history. This is a suggestion for studying. You can choose to listen or not. Secondly, I said that only by facing history can you be more broad-minded. This is my personal opinion. You can choose not to agree. Furthermore, I really can't express the idiom accepting all rivers into the sea in your country's language. This is the truth. I did not mention your country, so how can I humiliate you? How could he apologize? If you insist, that's fine too. We can look for our respective instructors first, and then we can go to the tournament committee together. In front of the committee members of each country, we can repeat everything you heard and what I said, including the intolerable existence you mentioned earlier. We can ask the committee members of each country to judge who was rude first and who needs to apologize to whom. Tianqin, who was quick-witted, would never give the other party something to use against her. She had been on guard from the very beginning. You want to apologize? No way. When the pretty Korean female student saw this, a dim light flashed in her eyes. Instructor Kim was right. They had indeed underestimated the Chinese students. Tianqin stopped watching and walked over. She pulled the angry female student aside and whispered a few words into her ear. The angry female student with the flat nose glared at Tianqin. "I'll remember you. Just you wait." At the same time, he did not forget to glare at Yi Qian, as if all the mistakes were caused by the Chinese students. He didn't know what the prettier female student had said, but the female student with the flat nose had some misgivings. After saying some harsh words, she snorted heavily and walked out of the room. Chapter 36:14. The Korean girls walked out of the room. Tianqin and Yi Qian looked at each other and smiled. "You want to bully us? You must be dreaming." She had wanted to say something when they were outside, but Instructor Lee had hinted at her with his eyes that there was no need for her to do anything. She had only replied with one sentence, but the anger in her heart had not dissipated at all. This was great. After exchanging blows back and forth, she felt much more comfortable in her heart. Tianqin, who felt much better, smiled and said, "They said they can't stand our presence. Actually, I can't stand their presence either. I want to apply for a change of room." Yi Qian, who was half squatting to tie the laces of his combat boots, stood up with his boots in hand. He glanced at the luggage on the bed and smiled. We don't need to apply. They have already done so. It's just a matter of whether their application is approved or not. They hadn't moved their luggage, even though they had been here for so long. It was obvious that they want to change rooms. They were probably waiting for their application to be approved. Tianqin wasn't that observant. Hearing this, she followed Yi Jian's line of sight and immediately smiled. That's for the best. I hope they can succeed. They're so angry at me. They'll definitely find a way to change rooms. Not necessarily. All the rooms have been arranged. The Monfei military won't change rooms for such a trivial matter. After Yi Jian finished speaking, she pondered for a while and said, I hope that they can continue to live with us. What? Tianqin didn't understand. Yi Jian blinked and revealed a sly smile. They don't want to share a room with us, but they have to. They must be in a bad mood every day. It's easy to affect their performance when they're in a bad mood. Isn't that great? Also, they can't understand what we say. We can continue to communicate normally when we return to the room. They won't understand, even if we say something bad about them. But you can hear everything they say. You can monitor them. Isn't that great? Tianqin laughed until tears welled up in her eyes. Are you trying to anger them to death? If they knew, they would faint from anger. Then there's nothing we can do about it. They're the ones who took things too hard. Yi Qian answered seriously. Someone gently and politely knocked on the door. The two of them immediately stopped talking and said, Please. Now that English had become their daily language, they didn't know who was knocking on the door, so it was best to express themselves in English. Two female students from Japan came in. First, they politely bowed to Yi Qian and Tianqin. Then, they introduced themselves and said that they hoped that the Chinese students would be able to count on them in the upcoming competition. At the same time, they also said that if they made the Chinese students feel bad in any way, they would apologize. Because this was a competition and they wanted to win, they could only put friendship as the second priority. Yi Qian's eyes darkened as he politely explained his intentions. This was a hidden opponent. He looked humble and polite, but in reality, his attacks were fierce. What they didn't know was that the situation on the male student's side was the same as theirs. Zhang Minghong and Jiang Yang from the Air Force Academy were also staying in the same room as the Korean students, while the Japanese students were staying next door. The way they got along was similar to Yi Qian and Tianqin. They also met with the Japanese students and received the Japanese students' politeness and attacks. The Korean students directly showed themselves, while the Japanese students quietly began to attack. This kind of opponent was truly terrifying. Chapter 36:15. The Japanese's attack was neither servile nor overbearing, which made the Chinese students wait solemnly. This kind of opponent was a real opponent, strong and powerful. They could defeat opponents they thought were unfavorable to them without batting an eyelid. And the Chinese students were the opponents they needed to defeat. Not only did they express their stance to the Chinese students, but they also expressed their stance to the students of several Asian countries. They really treated everyone equally, which made people vigilant but not hateful. They were unlike the Korean students, who did not respect their opponents from the beginning. As soon as the Japanese female students left, Tianqin said with a serious expression, Let's talk to Instructor Li about this. I wonder how the situation is with the male students. Yi Qian was used to being provoked by opponents. The Japanese's attack was nothing to her, who had participated in the International Special Forces competition with Captain Xia and Big Brother. She had not thought of looking for Li Jinyan, but seeing Tianqin's serious expression, she said, Well, I can see if the male students are okay. The male students had already arrived at Li Jinyan's room. All the instructors had arranged single rooms for them, which was to facilitate communication between the instructors and their own students. Li Jinyan, who knew about this, looked at the time. Facing the serious expressions of the male students, he said calmly, Let's wait for the two female students to come. They should be in the same situation as you. It should be said that the Japanese students had talked to several Asian countries. Just before the 14 male students arrived, The Korean students next door also entered Instructor Kim's room with serious expressions. It had to be said that the Japanese's move was very clever. It instantly made the students of other countries feel psychological pressure. When Yi Qian and Tianqin came in, they saw that the 14 male students were already there. When they saw the two of them, the male students all raised their hands and greeted them with relaxed expressions. Had they already talked to them? Yi Qian, who raised his hand in response, couldn't help but smile. His gaze passed through the crowd and landed on the bed. When the two siblings' eyes met, they both smiled happily at the same time. Obviously, the two siblings' mood was not affected by the Japanese students' attack. In the face of a Japanese's neither servile nor overbearing attack, Li Jinyan looked at the young and resolute faces and smiled faintly. This is a strategy. The competition hasn't started yet, but the Japanese students have already begun to exert psychological pressure on you. They put the competition first and friendship second. We're the same. Let's let them know that we also see them as strong opponents that we need to defeat. We'll give them a taste of their own medicine. Also, Japan's attack also shows that they have a lot of psychological pressure for this competition. It's understandable that instead of being affected by the students of other countries, it's better to take the initiative to affect the students of other countries first. This is called preemptive strike, which is the best strategy for military strategists. In your hearts, you also see them as strong opponents that you need to defeat. It's just that we have always been reserved and don't like to show our thoughts. In this case, you can continue to choose to smile and face them. It's just that you inadvertently let the opponent know your thoughts. Actions without words are often more deterrent and more stressful than words. You don't have to care too much about what they do. What you did before is what you're doing now. It's not a good thing to let others see through you at a glance. Continue to maintain your current reserve manner. Be bold and forceful and plan strategies without batting an eyelid. This will make your opponents who take the initiative to attack even more fearful. Chapter 36:16. Just like Li Jinyan himself, his silence was very oppressive. Just by standing there without saying a word, everyone knew that he was a powerful character that was not to be trifled with. Letting him lead the team overseas was an arrangement made after careful consideration by the military. First, he was very young and would not blindly adhere to the rules. Second, he was calm and steady, which would make the students more convinced. Third, he was capable. Although he was young, he had a strong aura. No one would dare to look down on him when he walked out. Fourth, since it was a competition between the military academies of various countries, it was not appropriate to send an old person. It was better to send a young and capable one, which would let the other countries see what the young soldiers of China were like. Taking all these factors into consideration, the military decided to let Li Jinyan be the chief instructor and lead the team overseas for the competition. They believed that with his ability and the students' own abilities, there would be no problems. This was indeed the case. The cadets of the 4 military academies trusted the young instructor Li very much and would come to him for advice on anything. After his analysis, the 16 of them felt as if they had taken a calming pill, and their hearts calmed down again. The student from the Air Force Academy laughed and said, "Instructor Li, according to what you said, we are all the same. There is no difference, so there's no need to be afraid, right? You can ignore the fear. Since we are all the same, there is no need to worry about it. As for the difference in strength, it depends on whether you can defeat your opponent. Friendship first. Forget it. What we pursue is the competition." Li Jinyan led the team and did not think about friendship first. I personally pay more attention to results and prefer to be a top soldier. For an international competition like this, either you don't come, or you come and win some prizes and get a few rankings. Otherwise, why would the students from Japan and Korea act like they will definitely win from the beginning? Because they also put the competition first. I just said be more reserved. Although we are also here for the competition, we must be more reserved. Don't let others see through us. There were no other requirements. They were here for the rankings. The students were overjoyed when they heard this. They would quietly compete to obtain a ranking, and after obtaining a ranking, they would subtly compete in the next competition. Then they would subtly compete again to obtain a ranking, and so on until the end of the competition. When Yi Qian saw that the students had relaxed, he became even calmer. He secretly gave his elder brother a thumbs up. She did not expect that the strict and impartial big brother who trained the water ghosts, who was so cold that no one dared to approach him, also had a friendly side to him. This was the first time she had seen it. She stood by the windowsill, which was half closed. A ray of sunlight fell on the ground from all sides. Yi Qian happened to step on it, and a ray of sunlight fell on her face through the gap in the windowsill. When she smiled, the bright and beautiful sunlight seemed to follow her smile. The sunlight was bright and beautiful, and her smile was as dazzling as a peach blossom. Li Jinyan unconsciously deepened a smile at the corner of his mouth. His sister was supposed to be carefree and carefree. She should have a dazzling smile and innocent eyes. Gloominess and heaviness really didn't suit her. Yes, he would let her smile for now. Soon, he would make her unable to smile for the rest of her life. Yi Qian, who was smiling with curved eyebrows, suddenly felt a chill run down his spine. He had a bad feeling that something big was going to happen very soon. She looked around and did not notice anything. However, the deep smile at the corner of her big brother's mouth stunned her. Chapter 36:17. The cold Li Jinyan smile stunned the male cadets around him. The other cadets did not dare to say it out loud, but the male cadet from the Naval Academy did. He exclaimed, "Instructor Li, you really should smile more. When you smile like that, it's really even more beautiful than a woman." He didn't dare to say this because their instructor Li had already put away the smile on his face and was looking at him coldly. In an instant, this male cadet from the Naval Academy was terrified. How could he dare to say it again? He did not even dare to speak now. When the other male cadets saw this, they all silently averted their gazes. For some reason, they all seemed to know what the unfinished words were, because they were also speaking from the bottom of their hearts. In this place, only Yi Qian dared to continue smiling. In order to save some face for her brother, she turned around, put her hands on the windowsill, and faced outside with a smile. To be honest, she also felt that her brother's smile was more exquisite and beautiful than a woman's. Captain Xia's handsomeness belonged to the yuppie type of handsomeness. His facial features were clear and handsome, and there was a hint of wickedness at the corners of his brows. Big Brother's handsomeness, on the other hand, was exquisite and cold. His brows were long and slender, and his nose was straight. His facial features were clear and handsome. Because he did not like to smile, his eyebrows were always cold. When the corners of his mouth were pressed together, it was like an unsheathed sword, instantly causing people to overlook his facial features. Now that he had suddenly smiled, the cadets who had not dared to look at him too closely suddenly found a bright spot. They were all instantly attracted by his smile. Unfortunately, this benefit only lasted for a few seconds. In the blink of an eye, it became a towering snowy mountain that could only be admired from afar. They did not dare to get close to Instructor Li. Li Jinyan was already very lenient towards his cadets. If it had been the water ghosts of the Storm Commandos, he would have already punished them with all sorts of training. As Yi Qian smiled, she felt that something was not quite right behind her. She turned her head to look and saw that the 15 cadets, including Tianqin, had all quietly left one by one. They did not seem to have any intention of asking her to leave with them. "Yi Qian, I'll wait for you in my room. Instructor Li wants to talk to you in private." Tianqin, who was the last to leave, waved at Yi Qian. Under Li Jinyan's cold gaze, she walked away step by step, not forgetting to close the door behind her. The 15 students left together, and the room suddenly became a lot more spacious. Li Jinyan rubbed his temples. He felt that training this group of students was more tiring than leading a special training team for a month. They were young, energetic, and had 100,000 Ys. If one were to say that they were mature, they would always do some childish things. If one were to say that they were childish, each and every one of them was so sharp that it made him admire them. Even the slightest movement in the wind could not escape their eyes. He also had a lot to say. In front of them, he could finish a month's worth of words in a single day. It was physically and mentally exhausting. After returning to the country, he didn't want to continue hanging out with these students for a moment longer. It was better to quickly return to the team. And most importantly, these students, after rubbing his temples, Li Jinyin looked up at his sister and said helplessly, "The students nowadays are very bold. Do you often bully the instructors in school?" How would he dare? Yi Qian hurriedly denied it. Bullying the instructors is like stepping on a lion's head. We're tired of living, so we definitely wouldn't dare. But we often joke about the instructors. Bro, your smile just now was so beautiful. In the future, you don't even have to speak when you chase after sisters-in-law. Just smile. You can even smile for sisters-in-law for me. Ouch. That hurts. After saying that, his head was also hit hard. Yi Qian, who was a step slower to react, held his head in pain and almost squeezed out 2 streams of tears. Chapter 36:18. It really hurt. He didn't hold back at all. Do you think your brother is selling his body? Li Jinyin retracted his hand after giving Yi Qian a popcorn. He pointed to the only steel green leather chair in the room. Sit. I want to talk to you. Yi Qian sat down obediently. She knew what he wanted to talk about. She sat down and smiled bitterly. Brother, I know what you want to say. Don't worry, I'm fine. I'm just thinking too much. Her answer made Li Jinyin's heart ache. She always liked to silently shoulder everything on her own. How could her thin shoulders handle too much? As her brother and her closest relative, he would do his best to share her burdens and resolve her difficulties. But Li Jinyin secretly adjusted his emotions. There was no hurry. It wouldn't be too late to scold her later. Yi Qian didn't say anything. Li Jinyin had already guessed that her strange behavior these past few days was because of Xia Jinyuan, especially when she suddenly changed her expression when she got out of the car. It was as if she sensed something. It made his heart tighten. After returning to the room, he immediately contacted the people back in the country and called Major General Yang. Major General Yang didn't say much. He only instructed Yi Qian to talk to Commander-in-Chief Xia. This made him feel uneasy. It was one thing to be worried about her, but he couldn't accept her reaction. She didn't have the calmness of a Special Forces soldier at all. Don't worry, don't worry. It won't be too late to teach her a lesson after she finished talking to the people back in the country. Female soldier Yi Qian, please be prepared for a cruel lecture. I just talked to the people back in the country. You can talk to Commander-in-Chief Xia. Li Jinyin took out the phone from under his pillow. His cold eyes moved slightly. He said calmly, "Your intuition has always been so accurate that it scares me. You should ask the Commander-in-Chief to make yourself feel more at ease. It's anti-theft. Don't worry about it." Over here, the only person who could communicate with the country was the instructor. Li Jinyin's phone had an anti-theft system, but it could only be used in the room. Outside of the room, all signals were blocked. This was Monfei's military's protection of their military-restricted area. Yi Qian's attention was focused on his phone, so he didn't notice how turbulent Li Jinyin's eyes were. She took a deep breath before taking the phone. She desperately wanted to know how the person she cared about the most was doing. Commander-in-Chief Xia, who had been waiting for her call, picked it up as soon as it rang. Xiao Yi, this girl, was deeply in love with his 6th brother. She was probably so in love with him that she had developed a mysterious telepathy that could not be explained by scientific common sense. Little Yi, how had you been these past few days? Commander-in-Chief Xia didn't immediately talk about Xia Jinyuan. He first asked about Yi Qian's situation. He learned from Major General Yang that her condition had been very bad these past few days. When she got out of the car, she almost fell down. Yi Qian could hear the deep concern in his voice. He didn't dare to say that he was a little absent-minded these past few days. He calmed himself down and replied, "I'm fine. I just missed the country a little." Because the call was made overseas and in a military-restricted area, although the phone was monitored by an anti-theft system, the mission that Xia Jinyuan carried out was too confidential. Yi Qian couldn't ask Commander-in-Chief Xia directly. Commander-in-Chief Xia also couldn't tell Yi Qian directly. He could only pass on the message through small talk. After a few minutes of conversation, Commander-in-Chief Xia only said the exact words that Xia Jinyuan asked his comrades to pass on to Yi Qian. Chapter 36:19. Yi Qian, who had been waiting for the news, tightened her grip on her phone when she heard this. The veins on the back of her hand bulged. Li Jinyan, who had been paying attention, also tightened his grip on his phone. While he was worried about her, Li Jinyan, who had always been strict with himself, felt more and more anger building up in her heart. Just because Xia Jinyuan went abroad on a mission, she caused herself to be in a daze. No matter how accurate her intuition was, she had to know who she was first. After a few seconds, Yi Qian loosened her grip and answered Commander-in-Chief Xia in her most normal voice. Tell him not to worry. I will wait for him to come back. I will wait for him to come back. He told her to wait for him, and that he would come back alive to see her. Her Captain Xia had always been a man of his word. He had never disappointed her before, and this time was no different. With his news, Yi Qian was suddenly enlightened. Since he said that he would definitely come back alive to see her, then she believed that he would definitely come back. Commander-in-Chief Xia heard the girl's clear but heavy voice. Even someone as calm as him felt his eyes sting. After calming himself down, Commander-in-Chief Xia smiled in relief and said, "Don't worry, child. Just focus on the competition. We will all wait for your triumphant return." Family Xia was really lucky to have such a daughter-in-law. Rascal, you have to come back alive. Otherwise, who knows which family will take advantage of the daughter-in-law you're guarding. Old Master Qin came to visit a few days ago. He even lamented to Old Master Qin that his grandson had known Xiao Yi for a long time. But what was the use of knowing her early? Such a good granddaughter-in-law was always someone else's. He even said that if he had known about Xiao Yi earlier, no matter how unhappy Qin Xiu was, he would have whipped Qin Xiu until he agreed. When the old master and old madam heard this, their hearts trembled in fear. Later on, they heard that they had originally agreed to go to the southern province together, but Xiao Yi suddenly changed her itinerary and returned to the southern province first. The smiles on the old master and old madam's faces never stopped. He even said, "Old Qin, you'd better not have any ideas about my granddaughter-in-law. It's useless to know her early. It mainly depends on whether the two children are fated to be together. Your old Qin family's granddaughter-in-law is someone else. You have to continue looking for her slowly. Qin Xiu is not an ordinary rival in love. If something happens to you, the daughter-in-law you have been guarding for so long will definitely be taken away by someone else. Don't you think you will suffer a loss?" After hanging up the phone, Commander-in-Chief Xia lit a cigarette for himself. He didn't smoke much and only took a puff occasionally, letting the cigarette burn to the end. Yi Qian returned the phone. Before he could say anything, Li Jinyan spoke first. "Are you always this worried every time he goes out? Are you so worried that you can't even take care of yourself sometimes?" His tone was a little cold, and there was even a hint of anger in it. It was probably the first time that Li Jinyan had treated him so angrily in real life. Yi Qian's heart thumped heavily. He nodded lightly, and there was a hint of anxiety in his clear eyes. At this moment, Big Brother was Demon Kingly during training. The coldness in his eyes was like a cold arrow that pierced all the muscles in her body. She didn't even dare to breathe too loudly. After nodding, she shook her head repeatedly. No, I'm not this worried every time. It's because I know the content of his mission in advance and know how dangerous it is. That's why I'm affected. Is this the first time you know that he's in a high-risk job?" Chapter 36:20. Her nervousness didn't make the anger in Demon King Li's eyes subside. Instead, it became even colder. "Answer me. Is this the first time you found out?" As expected, it was so scary. His sister, who was doted on by her brother, was so frightened that her heart rate was a little irregular. It was as if she was on a roller coaster. "No, I've always known." "Brother, calm down. Let's talk things over." It was too scary. His face darkened and his aura became heavy. It was as if he was a demon king descending into the world. She felt like she was about to lose her life in the next second. The enraged Li Jinyan had no intention of letting Yi Jian off. Dark clouds gathered on his exquisite, handsome face, and it became so dark that there was a faint rumble of thunder and lightning. Yi Qian was so frightened that she couldn't sit still anymore. She stood up with a whoosh and stood up straight. She knew that the person she was facing now wasn't her brother, but her instructor. An instructor who could reprimand her and punish her severely. Li Jinyan also stood up. His dark eyes were as cold as ice as he stared coldly at Yi Qian. It seemed like she had forgotten her own identity and Xia Jinyuan's identity because he hadn't reminded her during this period of time. You want me to calm down? Yi Qian, I've been watching your situation for the past few days. From the initial worry to the current disappointment. Yi Qian, as a member of the Special Forces, you've disappointed me. As your former captain, I taught you how to kill the enemy and how to fight, but I didn't teach you how to face it. This is my fault. Answer me. Who is Xia Jinyuan? He shouted in a low voice. He wasn't the kind of person who would fly into a rage. His eyes were filled with anger, but he definitely wasn't the kind who would shout and shout. And this kind of person was usually more terrifying. Yi Qian answered solemnly. He's a soldier. Huh. I thought you didn't know that he was a soldier. Li Jinyan smirked coldly. What about you? Who are you? I'm also a soldier. Yi Qian answered firmly. In return, Li Jinyan sneered softly. So you knew all about it. Since you knew all about it, then you knowingly committed a crime. Do you know what you did wrong? Do you know where you went wrong? Who is Xia Jinyuan? He's a soldier before he's Yi Qian's boyfriend. Who are you, Yi Qian? She's also a soldier first, and then Xia Jinyuan's girlfriend. A soldier's duty must always come first, and feelings must always come second. After putting on a military uniform and carrying a steel gun, you must remember that you are a soldier first and foremost, not some other identity. As for you, you only remember that both sides are soldiers, but you forget what a soldier should bear. Don't tell me that soldiers are also people. That's right, soldiers are also people, and soldiers also have emotions and desires. But don't forget, as a soldier, you have no right to be sad. You can't even control your own actions well. You can't even be strict with yourself. Yi Qian, look down at your military uniform. Take a good look. Do you have the right to be distracted while you're on a mission? Do you have the right to worry about him? No, in my eyes, you really don't have the right. You're even more unworthy of all the training he gave you. You're wasting all his efforts. This time, Li Jinyan was no longer an older brother who doted on his sister. He used words as sharp as a sword to fiercely attack Yi Qian. He wanted to make Yi Qian face her own mistakes directly. Chapter 36:21. Other people can say that soldiers are also human, and that soldiers also have emotions and desires. However, as a soldier, you can never think this way, because above all emotions and desires, you have to put the country first. Xia Jinyuan didn't know about Yi Qian's worries, so he didn't notice and warn Yi Qian in time. Today, Li Jinyan's scolding made Yi Qian's figure sway, and the color that had just returned to his face drained away in an instant. And since Li Jinyan had spoken, he didn't intend to let Yi Qian off so easily. He might as well not say it, but if he did, it wouldn't be just a few words, nor would it be in a gentle voice. It would definitely draw blood and cut you to pieces. At this moment, Yi Jian's every word had been cut to the bone by his every word. She was covered in cuts and bruises. But even so, Li Jinyan didn't let Yi Qian off so easily. His cold gaze was fixed on Yi Qian, and the words he said made Yi Qian feel extremely ashamed. He dares to sacrifice for the country in ways that others don't. But what about you? Yi Qian, what are you doing now? I don't believe that he didn't tell you what you should do if something really happens to him one day. Based on my understanding of him, he definitely told you. Every word was harsh, but every word was advice. Yi Qian, who had been scolded to the point where he didn't dare to move, pursed his lips and seriously accepted his elder brother's cold criticism. Yes, her Captain Xia did tell her what she should do if he really was gone one day. She could not fall. She needed to live well for him. She needed to use her own ability to protect the country that they shared together. She could not retreat. She could not be afraid. She needed to continue to walk forward bravely. She needed to continue walking forward with his willingness until she sacrificed herself or until she retired from the army. If not for Li Jinyan's stern admonishment, Yi Qian would not have realized what she had done wrong. Ever since she returned to school from the capital, she had been constantly worried. She had let her worry continue until it had become a habit that she could not help but think about every day. She wasn't distracted in class, and she didn't think too much about it during training. But once she was free, she couldn't help but think about how her lover was doing. She looked forward to it, thought about it, and thought about it, until she finally received news of him. She found out that they couldn't even tell the military where they were and could only say that everything was fine. The moment she heard the news, she cried tears of joy, but also became even more worried. Until today, when the palpitations that scared her came again, her emotions were somewhat out of control. Just as her elder brother had said, she had forgotten her own identity because of love. She had let down Captain Xia's nurturing. Responsibility is as heavy as a mountain. Stand aside for love. Yi Qian, remember your place, remember his place, and remember what I said today. If you can't bear the responsibility of wearing this uniform, then it's better to take it off as soon as possible. Don't let more people be disappointed in you, and don't let him, who's been holding your hand all this time, be disappointed. The last sentence was like a huge rock that rolled down from the top of a mountain. It smashed heavily into Yi Qian's heart, causing her internal organs to hurt. If one day she let Captain Xia down, just thinking about it made Yi Qian scared. Li Jinyan did not let Yi Qian apologize to him. After he finished speaking, he pointed at the door with a cold expression. His tone was so cold that it seemed like he would cut off their sibling relationship in the next second. Go back and reflect on yourself. You don't have to apologize in front of me. Chapter 36:22. This round of criticism instantly made Yi Jian sober up. After she sobered up, shame and self-blame surged into her heart like a tide, making her ashamed to face her brother. After giving a military salute, Yi Qian didn't stay any longer and returned to her room to reflect. As soon as she left, the handsome and cold Li Jinyan stared at the closed door and stood there quietly for a long time. Then, he took a few steps and sat on the only chair in the room. He raised his hand and gently pinched the bridge of his nose. He didn't want to criticize his only sister, but when she made a mistake, as her brother, he had to stand up and tell her sternly what she did wrong. He could spoil her, but he couldn't spoil her without any principles. He could give her everything, but he couldn't turn a blind eye to her mistakes. He couldn't do it. He would rather be hated by her. He had to criticize her severely. This was true love and wouldn't hurt her. But with his sister's temperament, she definitely wouldn't hate him. Judging from her expression just now, she didn't hold a grudge. Anyway, she was awakened by his scolding and had a look of shame on her face. His younger sister's perception was quite good. After this reminder, it was likely that she would not make the same mistake that would disappoint him in the future. Xia Jinyuan once told him that Yi Qian would never make the same mistake twice. He definitely wouldn't give her the chance to make the same mistake again. His thoughts were the same as his own. He didn't want her to make the same mistake again. He had to stop the first time and uproot the small seedlings that reignited from the dead. He had to trim the extra branches on her body so that she could grow stronger. Moreover, she wasn't an ordinary soldier. She would be a special forces soldier in the future. No, she was a special forces soldier now. She was a special forces soldier who carried out high-risk missions. Every time she carried out a mission, she would twist her head into her own hands. If she wasn't properly trimmed, small mistakes would accumulate over time and eventually become big mistakes. By then, she would be ruined. Li Jinyan, whose nose was slightly hot from the pinching, let out a long sigh. When he criticized Yi Qian, he didn't feel good either. He sat quietly for a while before he calmed down. Yi Qian didn't calm down. It wasn't because of the harsh criticism, but because he couldn't forgive himself for the mistake he made unknowingly. The Korean girl's voice came from behind the half-closed door. Yi Chien, whose hand was already on the door handle, paused. He adjusted his breathing and state of mind before pushing the door open and entering. The three people in the room looked up when they heard the noise. The girl with the flat nose bit her lower lip and glanced at Yi Jian unwillingly. Then, she obediently packed the luggage that they had not packed before. The more delicate Korean girl suddenly smiled at Yi Jian to show her goodwill. She greeted him in English. "Sorry to disturb you for the next few days. I'm Lee Shan-ri from the Korean Army Military Academy. It's nice to meet you and Tianxin." She nudged the girl who was silently packing her luggage. The girl's face was full of unhappiness and reluctance, but she still greeted Yi Chien. "Hello, I'm Lu Anna from the Army Military Academy." Yi Chien looked at Tianxin. Tianxin's lips moved, and she said, "Ridiculous." She didn't know what was going on either. The two of them had only entered 3 minutes before Yi Chien, and it was just like this when they entered. Chapter 36:23. That meant that the two of them would not be able to switch rooms, and the four of them would still have to stay in the same room. Yi Chien did not say anything about this. Previously, she had thought that if the two Korean students really did switch rooms, that would be good too, so as to prevent them from hating each other. But now, she did not have the time to deal with their lack of intelligence. She had to get back at them as soon as possible. She just had to let them watch over her all day long. Faced with the two of them taking the initiative to greet her, Yi Chien nodded slightly and replied, "Nice to meet you." That was all. She did not even introduce herself. Tianxin did at least introduce herself and which school she came from. Li Shanli and Lu Anna, the two female students from the Korean Army Academy, thought that by taking the initiative to speak, they would at least be able to gain the friendship of the Chinese female students by showing her friendliness. But in the end, she only said, "Nice to meet you." Lu Anna, with her flat nose, was the first to lose her patience. "Hey you." As soon as she opened her mouth, the prettier Li Shanli immediately pulled her back, warning Lu Anna not to clash with the Chinese female students with her eyes. The Japanese female students had taken the initiative to provoke them, but the Chinese female students were at least not as arrogant as the Japanese. Instructor Jin Zhongzai had told them to be on guard against the Japanese and maintain a friendly relationship with the Chinese students. Lu Anna was pulled back by Li Shanli, and the words she was about to blurt out were forcefully swallowed back. She did not say anything else, but when she was packing her luggage, she used a little too much force, and the metal bed seemed to shake because of her. Tianxin and Yi Chien did not pay much attention to it. Jet lag made the two of them tired, so they simply packed their things and lay down on the bed to sleep. The students from the various countries from Asia all had to experience jet lag. This day was also the only day that the students from the various countries could rest. Tomorrow was the start of the international competition between the military academies, so they should make the best use of this time to recharge their energy. Lying on the bed, Yi Chien only closed her eyes and did not immediately fall asleep. She was still reflecting on the mistakes she had made during this period. If not for Li Jinyan's harsh criticism, Yi Chien really would not have realized that she had pushed herself into a corner and made a mistake. Is this the first day you know what kind of occupation he has? Who is Xia Jinyuan? He's a soldier before he's Yi Qian's boyfriend. Who are you, Yi Chien? She's also a soldier first, and then Xia Jinyuan's girlfriend. A soldier's duty must always come first. Feelings must come second. Yi Jian, who was lying flat with her hands on her lower abdomen, turned over slightly and lay on her side. She blocked the sight of the people who were sizing her up from the direction of the iron bed opposite her with her back. Yi Chien closed his eyes and reflected deeply on himself. Thinking carefully about what he had done during this period of time, he felt a chill in his heart. Wrong, wrong. She was really, really wrong. Her mistake was that she shouldn't have let her worry about Captain Xia affect her. Her mistake was that she shouldn't have ignored their identity because she was worried about Captain Xia. He shouldn't have put the cart before the horse because he was worried about Captain Xia. He didn't even care about the mission he was carrying out. Wrong, wrong. What a big mistake. What a big mistake. Big Brother was right. If Captain Xia saw her like this, he would definitely be disappointed. Not just disappointed, but deeply disappointed. She had disappointed him, and she had also disappointed herself. Chapter 36:24. Yi Qian gradually fell asleep as she reflected on herself. During this period of time, the quality of her sleep had been very average. Ever since she suddenly woke up from her dream that night, the quality of her sleep had plummeted. Now that she had been severely reprimanded by Li Jingyan, she actually calmed down a lot. She deeply realized her mistake and buried her worry for Xia Jinyuan deep in her heart. She believed that he would definitely come back alive, so she fell asleep as she thought about it. The two female Korean students also lay on their beds. Although the room was arranged with metal beds, they were not on the upper or lower floors. Instead, there were single beds against the wall. The curtains were drawn to block out the sun. They slept side by side with Yi Qian. Li Shangli, who was separated by the aisle, kept her gaze on Yi Qian, whose back was facing her. She didn't know why, but she had a faint feeling that the Chinese student who could understand Korean wasn't the best. The real expert was the other Chinese student who was sleeping opposite her. Although she didn't talk much and didn't have a strong presence, she had a feeling that this Chinese student would be very good. A dog that bites doesn't bark. This Chinese student gave her such a feeling. After sizing up Yi Qian for a while, Li Shanli yawned lightly. Sleepy, she stopped staring and speculating about Yi Qian. As her eyelids gradually closed, Li Shanli also fell asleep. There was an 11-hour time difference between Monfei and China. It was now 10 o'clock at night, and all the Chinese students had already fallen asleep. As the instructor, Li Jingyan, and the instructors of the other countries had all gathered, the organizer, Monfei, announced the rules of the competition and what the students needed to pay attention to in their restricted military zones. The instructors of the other countries gathered together and exchanged questions in English with different accents. Some instructors who didn't speak English had a translator beside them to help them communicate. After a short exchange of greetings, they entered a serious meeting. Unlike the competition between the special forces, the basic competition schedule between the students of each country was announced in advance. There were also some special competitions in between to test the students' reaction and ability to respond. Li Jingyan took a quick look at the competition schedule for the next day. Then, he carefully checked it one by one. He did the same, and so did the other instructors around him. When he was looking at it seriously, instructor Kim Jong-jae from Korea, who was sitting on his right, suddenly leaned over and said in a low voice, "Tomorrow, we'll have to go through the spicy zone first, and then we'll have to carry the logs and run. The first day of the competition is all physical exhaustion. This is not fair to the students of our Asian countries. The European students don't need to adapt to the time difference like us Asian students. They can adapt to it quickly, but it's different for us Asian students. I think we need to work together to give our opinions to the competition committee. I'll make a suggestion first, and then you'll stand up and make a suggestion with me? What do you think? For the sake of our students, for the sake of our country's glory, we must fight for it." Jin Zhong said in a low voice. He did not ask Li Jingyan, but directly made his own arrangements, which was quite overbearing. There was a sense of superiority in his tone. It was as if the Chinese team's instructor had suggested it, the committee would definitely not agree. However, if the Korean team suggested it, it would definitely attract attention, and the problem would be solved. Chapter 36:25. Li Jingyan didn't know where this nonsensical and unreasonable sense of superiority came from. Li Jingyan closed the folder and said to instructor Kim Jong-jae, "You're not the only country with a time difference. Other than the students from Monfei Military Academy, most of the students from European countries, including the student from West Point, have a 4-hour time difference." Instructor Kim Jong-jae, "I can't agree with your suggestion because it's baseless and unreasonable. Of course, if you insist on bringing it up and think that the competition committee will take it seriously and change the entire competition schedule, you can bring it up. I believe you can do it without my secondment." Instructor Kim Jong-jae didn't expect that such a good proposal would be rejected by the Chinese instructor. His face fell on the spot, and he said righteously, "I'm not doing this for my country. I'm also thinking about your country. All countries know that the strength of China has always been at a low level. If your country's students lower their level again because of the jet lag, have you considered the feelings of your students? Believe me, as long as the competition schedule is changed." With a serious face, instructor Kim Jong-jae took out the competition schedule for the third day. You can take a look at the competition schedule for the third day. It revolves around rifle shooting, pistol shooting, protection, and rescue. These competitions don't require excessive physical strength and are enough for our students to adapt to the jet lag as soon as possible. For the sake of our students and the glory of our country, you have no reason to refuse my proposal. Li Jinyan glanced at it, and there was a faint smile on his handsome face. You can make this proposal for the sake of your students and the glory of your country. And I choose to believe that our country's students have enough ability to overcome all the difficulties in front of them. Instructor Kim Jong-jae, I have no interest in your proposal. You can ask the instructors of other Asian countries. Sorry, I need to study the content of the competition. Please don't disturb me again. Thank you. His cold and unyielding tone directly blocked the Korean instructor's follow-up persuasion. He wanted to talk to the instructors of other Asian countries, but on the other side was the Japanese instructor. The other party's confident look made him completely unwilling to have any communication with the other party. Japan is a very annoying existence, even more disgusting than China. Seeing that his persuasion was ineffective, instructor Jin Jongzai could only give up. If he brought it up alone, the tournament committee would definitely not pay attention to it. If he brought in another country's instructors to bring it up together, and then his side could be a little more forceful, it might be possible to change the tournament schedule. But now, instructor Jin Jongzai glanced at Li Jinyan, and then the corners of his mouth curled into a cold smile. They believed that their students would be able to overcome the difficulties? He wanted to see how powerful the Chinese students were. At that time, the Chinese students would lose without any face, and this instructor would regret his actions today. Li Jinyan no longer paid attention to the gaze of the Korean instructor beside him. He was very serious about the competition schedule of the research institute. After looking at it, he became more and more confident. With Yi Qian around and her leadership, these events were not a problem at all. Yi Qian and all the Chinese students knew that the next day's competition would be held at 6 p.m. Monfei time. After sleeping for almost 7 hours, her mental state had recovered to its peak. Chapter 36:26. Yi Jian and Tianqi knew that the competition would start at 6 in the evening in Monfei. Yi Jian and Tianqi didn't get up to eat lunch. They slept until 5 in the evening due to the jet lag. They woke up in time for dinner, which was 5 in the morning. Usually, Yi Jian woke up at the same time as Tianqi. The two of them did not wake up the sleeping Korean female students. They got up quietly, tidied themselves up, and left quietly after closing the door. As evening approached, Monfei was not as hot as it was during the day. Instead, it was a little cooler. They put on their training uniforms and rolled up their sleeves, so they did not feel very hot. In order to take care of the participating students from all over Asia, the Monfei military arranged for them to stay on the same floor of the same barracks. The barracks were only 3 floors high. The top floor was for the staff of the Monfei military who received the students from all over Asia. The second floor was for the female students from all over Asia. The first floor was for the instructors from all over Asia. The barracks were very quiet at this time. The female students from all over Asia had not yet woken up from the jet lag. Yi Qian and Tianqi closed the door softly and walked through the corridor with light footsteps. They did not want to disturb the students from other countries who were still staying in the barracks. When they passed by the room where the female students from Japan were staying, they heard the door open with a click. They saw 2 female students from the Joint Staff School of Japan open the door. The 4 of them looked at each other. The female students from Japan had already bowed and greeted them very politely. Yi Qian and Tianqin also bowed and greeted them in a friendly manner. Since they had all left the barracks together, they naturally went downstairs together. They did not talk much. They only asked if they had slept well and if they were ready for dinner. They kept an appropriate distance from each other. After they went downstairs, they politely said goodbye and went to their respective instructors' rooms. Tianqin turned around and whispered to Yi Qian. The two of them showed me their ability to remain calm and collected. They are very steady and not exaggerated at all. They were much more mature than the Korean students. Their words and actions were very well behaved, and they had a strong sense of self-discipline. Yi Qian nodded lightly. The students from a joint staff school are not bad. Their teaching methods are a combination of self-study, lectures, discussions, special research, and overseas visits. They provide senior commanders and staff officers for Japan on land, sea, and air. Also, they pay a lot of attention to overseas inspection. Every semester, before the students graduate, they have to go to the relevant countries to inspect the national defense and military situation. These two female students are from the graduating class. What's more, this school is also a research institute on how the Japanese army works together in battle. They don't lack brains and intelligence. Their strength is far beyond what we can see now. When Tianqin heard this, her face became more and more serious. Once the students who graduated from the Joint Staff School entered the Army, they would hold a very important position. Therefore, they would learn a lot of knowledge that they might not even be able to learn in the Army. Their influence and actions on joint operations, as well as the development and trends of military technology, would be exposed to them in the school. Through the simulation of strategy and command, they would be able to develop in all aspects. This time, coming to participate in the competition was also another opportunity for them to go overseas for inspection. Moreover, they could also test the strength of the military school students of many countries in one go. Just from the ordinary conversation with them just now, their careful thinking made them feel dangerous. Chapter 36:27. Tianqin gently exhaled, pursed her lips, and said in a deep voice, "Just thinking about it makes my scalp tingle." They've been taking the initiative to attack from the beginning, and they've already started their strategy from the beginning. We have to be more careful in the upcoming competition. Don't be too nervous. Yi Qian smiled. This is a competition between countries. They're testing us, and we can also test them. The most direct way is to observe their strength. They have their strategy, and we have ours. You have your strategy, and I have my ways. We'll deal with whatever comes our way. They've been treating us as strong opponents from the beginning. It's obvious that they're under a lot of psychological pressure. Just now, when we went down the stairs together, the two of them looked at each other. Don't you think that if we walked to the back, we would reach out and push them down the stairs in the next second? With her teasing, Tianqin recalled how they had given way to each other before going down the stairs. She laughed out loud. "You don't say, it's true. I was wondering why they insisted on letting us walk in front. It turns out that they were afraid that we would backstab them." That's right. It's obvious that they're under a lot of psychological pressure. So, let's relax and let them speculate. I dare say that right now, they must think that we're unfathomable. Maybe they've already started thinking about how to guard against us. Tianqin's face was already red from laughing. She didn't dare to be too bold. She lowered her head and tried her best to stifle her laughter. She even held back her tears. When Yi Qian saw this, the corners of her mouth curved into a smile. Yi Qian had experienced actual combat, killed people on the battlefield, and competed with the special forces of several powerful countries. Naturally, her mental fortitude was better than Tianqin's. Now, Tianqin was her comrade-in-arms. Since she had more experience than Tianqin, of course, she had to give her a hand. However, it was not wrong to treat the Japanese students as strong opponents. In her heart, the two female students from Japan were naturally strong opponents. They would meet again in the arena. That would be the time for the real battle. For now, she was calm and did not need to think too much. Tianqin watched as Yi Qian smiled until his eyes curved into crescents. The smile in his eyes was like a pool of clear water, clear and bright, with a calmness that made people feel reassured. She wiped away the tears from the corners of her eyes and said, "Looks like you had a good night's sleep. You're so energized that you immediately jumped into the competition when the competition started." She didn't know what had happened to Yi Qian. She thought that Yi Qian hadn't slept well during this period of time and wasn't in a good state of mind. Now that she saw Yi Qian's dimpled smile, it was as if a heavy burden had been lifted off his shoulders. She attributed all this to the fact that Yi Qian had slept for several hours consecutively today. When Yi Qian heard this, his eyes flashed. It turned out that they had seen his previous state. Fortunately, he had been harshly reprimanded by his elder brother. It was not too late to wake up now. I slept for nearly 7 hours in a row. I didn't have a single dream. After dinner tonight, let's go for a walk and practice a few moves on the field. We'll go back to our room to sleep before 9 o'clock. How about that? After deeply reflecting on his mistakes, Yi Qian had entered his best state. He shouldered his responsibilities and was ready to fight at any time for the upcoming competition. Just as Tianqin had said, even if the competition started now, he would immediately jump into the competition. When they reached the door of Li Jinyan's room, Yi Qian raised his hand and knocked. A cold and harsh voice came from inside. Tianqin gently pushed Yi Qian. "You first." "I'm scared of Instructor Li." She was inexplicably in awe and didn't dare to speak loudly. Chapter 36-28. Zhang Minghong, Jiang Yang, Li Xiang, and the rest of the 14 male students had arrived 10 minutes earlier. They had already gone through the schedule for tomorrow's competition and were now discussing the control and strategy of the competition. When they saw Yi Qian and Tianqin enter, the 14 male students all looked at Yi Qian. Yi Qian was only a sophomore, while they were all juniors and seniors. However, they always liked to listen to Yi Qian first, so they were all very sure of Yi Qian. Li Jinyan's gaze had already swept over Yi Qian's face for a while. Seeing that her gaze was clear, without the gloominess from before, he couldn't help but secretly nod his head. It seemed like she had been awakened by his reprimand. Jade without being polished would not become useful. Even though she had already far surpassed her peers, and even these outstanding students had yet to reach her level, she still needed to work on it. Tomorrow's first competition will be Escape from the Poison Land. It will be held in a simulated village. The second competition will be carrying logs. It won't be a team carrying logs, but an individual. As for how heavy the logs are, I don't know yet. After that will be the obstacle course. I'm not worried about the other obstacles, but I'm worried about climbing the suspended chain barehanded. Under the chain bridge is a muddy pit about a meter deep. If you fall from the chain, you will lose points. The entire team will have to start from scratch. If you don't climb the chain in the allotted time, the entire team will lose points. There are only 3 major competitions tomorrow. 2 in the morning, 1 in the afternoon, and there might be an additional competition at night. It will be camping. When Li Jinyan mentioned the word camping, he saw Yi Qian's expression become extremely serious. After a slight pause, she asked Yi Qian, "Yi Qian, what do you think about camping?" Judging from her reaction just now, she probably thought of the same thing as him. Yi Qian said, "I think that if there is an additional competition, I'm afraid that we will have to prepare for the next competition before going to bed. When the time comes, we will have to sleep with our clothes on. We can't sleep too deeply in case of an emergency." "That's right. Since there's camping, there must be an emergency gathering. You all need to pay attention to it." The smile in Li Jinyan's eyes disappeared in the blink of an eye. His handsome face was cold as he calmly said, "Don't sleep too deeply. Beware of the students from the surrounding countries. If there's a catch type of additional competition, you must quickly subdue the enemy. Your reaction must be fast." The other students had not thought of this point. Hearing this, their faces turned solemn, and they nodded to show that they understood. Next up was the allocation of each group for tomorrow's competition, as well as the allocation of teamwork. Zhang Minghong realized that Yi Qian and their instructor Li had a rather high level of tacit understanding. The siblings analyzed and complimented each other, giving him the illusion that Yi Qian and instructor Li were not only siblings, but also comrades of many years. Their chemistry was too good. Instructor Li did not say a word, but Yi Qian could already guess what he was going to say next. And whenever Yi Qian suggested something, Instructor Li would immediately agree. Their cooperation made the students more and more engrossed. The more they listened, the more they felt that with Yi Qian and Instructor Li around, any difficulty in the competition would not be difficult at all. Because they were so engrossed in the discussion, the Chinese students all missed dinner time. When they looked up at the time after the discussion, good Lord, it was already 7:30 p.m. But it was not only the Chinese students who missed dinner time. Students from several other countries also did the same. When it met in the cafeteria, a total of several dozen students from several countries met and smiled tacitly. Chapter 36-29. Other than the students from West Point, there were also students from Fu Longji Military Academy, St. Cyr Military Academy, and Cranwell Air Force Academy in the cafeteria. These 4 military academies were famous all over the world. Needless to say, the military ability and quality of the students in these academies were even better. Even military academies like Japan and Korea had to stand aside. Therefore, that night, the Chinese students walked into the cafeteria before the 16 Korean and Japanese students. A second ago, they saw the Chinese students lifting their chins a little arrogantly, but the next second, when they walked into the cafeteria, they immediately lowered their chins and returned to normal. In front of the students from the 4 military academies, they didn't dare to be rash and had to be more reserved. The dinner was very enjoyable. He had a good time interacting with the students of these countries. However, the students of Japan were as silent as before. Even the occasional short interaction was limited to their own students. Even their coaches remained silent. The Korean students were much more active and easygoing. Li Shanli even said regretfully to a male student from West Point, "My camera was confiscated. I can only take photos with you after the competition. Compared to serious photos, I prefer to take photos with you guys. They're more natural and closer to our lives." Yi Qian, who was sitting at the steel table behind them, silently ate a mouthful of rice. The male student from Fu Longji Military Academy, who was sitting opposite her, smiled and said, "After the competition, the students from our 2 countries can take photos together. I will put them in my photo album at home and hang them on the wall. I will also invite my friends to enjoy them. I will also tell my friends and family that I am very happy to have met you guys." Yes, this was also a military academy student whose EQ and IQ were on the same level. Yi Qian was, of course, very happy and honored. Now, they could still chat and laugh together. They could talk about the local customs of their respective countries, about the good food and fun things to eat. The atmosphere was very harmonious. Although it was the first time they had met, they were of similar age and their conversation was full of wisdom. The originally quiet dining environment became a place for students from different countries to communicate. After dinner, the Chinese students and the students from Fu Longji Military Academy went for a walk on the field before returning. When they came back, Li Shanli and Luina were already sitting on the bed, talking about something. Seeing Yi Qian and Tian Qin come in, Luina's lips curled into a sneer, and she looked at them sideways. Li Shanli was very good at hiding her emotions. Seeing this, she stood up and showed a friendly smile. The more she acted like this, the more Tian Qin was wary of her. After she smiled back at her, she and Yi Qian took their toiletries to the bathroom. By the time the 2 of them returned, the 2 Koreans had already climbed into bed and fallen asleep. Yi Qian glanced at the army boots under the bed. A cold glint flashed across her eyes. She had left the laces of the army boots she needed to wear tomorrow outside, so that it would be convenient for her to wear them the next day. This was her personal habit. But now, the laces were placed inside. She gently tugged at Tian Qin and whispered something in her ear. Tian Qin's expression immediately darkened. She was also someone who could keep her cool. After she heard what had happened, she did not immediately question Yi Qian. Instead, she endured it. The laces of the army boots had been tied into a dead knot. This was the only trick that could not be used in public. However, if they found out about it tomorrow morning, this little trick would delay Yi Qian and Tian Qin. But this kind of little trick was really disdainful. Chapter 36:30. When the whistle blew at 5 in the morning the next day, the lights in the two barracks lit up almost at the same time. Yi Qian rolled out of bed and put on his training uniform in an orderly manner. After he was done, Yi Qian bent down to put on his shoes. Lu Enna, who also got out of bed quickly, stole a glance at him. Her eyes flashed with a smug smile. She kicked off her military boots and tightened the two laces in one go. Her actions were completed in 5 seconds. When Lu Enna saw this, she glared at Yi Qian. How is this possible? Last night, she had tied the shoelaces of the Chinese female trainees into a dead knot. Yi Jian, who had finished tying her shoelaces, raised her head abruptly. Her gaze was like an arrow leaving the bow as it shot towards Lu Enna, who was caught off guard. Her sudden gaze was too sharp and had a bone-chilling coldness. Lu Enna, who was caught off guard, did not have time to look away. She was so scared that her heart skipped a beat. Caught red-handed, Lu Enna panicked for a few seconds. She felt her aura being suppressed. When she came back to her senses, she immediately glared at Yi Qian. However, Yi Qian had already looked away and completely ignored her existence. This made Lu Enna so angry that she fell backwards. When Li Shanli saw this, he immediately reminded her, Fiona, she did not waste the Chinese trainee's time. Instead, she wasted her own time. If she had known this would happen, she would have stopped Fiona's little tricks last night. Now that she had failed to plot against the Chinese female trainees, it made them even more vigilant. The gains did not make up for the losses. Yi Qian was very fast. Tian Qin was also very fast. Both of them did not care about the Korean female trainees' little tricks. They finished washing up in 2 minutes and rushed downstairs to gather. It's really hard to guard against villains. They actually thought of tying a dead knot on her shoelaces. Tian Qin sneered as she ran. If that's the case, don't blame us for being rude. The morning breeze was very cool and refreshing. Yi Qian heard the footsteps coming down the stairs behind him. He replied to Tian Qin, if there's a chance, I'll make them suffer in silence. They won't even be able to say anything. What's so good about small tricks? If you want to use them, you should use big tricks to make the other party lose points. As they ran from the second floor to the first floor, they ran into students from other countries. In the morning light, Yi Qian and Tian Qin caught up with the Chinese male students. After meeting up with the male student, Yi Qian turned his head and looked back. When he saw that it was the Japanese female student who had been chasing after him, his dark eyes darkened slightly. She could feel that the female students from Japan were already targeting her and Tian Qin. Li Jinyan, who had already arrived at the field, held a stopwatch in his hand. Chapter 36:31. The competition had yet to officially begin, but smoke had already begun to fill the air. After the oath was taken, it was time for each country to clear out their equipment. The students of each country walked to their equipment area and quickly began to clear out their equipment, starting from large items such as helmets and combat backpacks. They then moved on to smaller items such as alcohol and sterile cotton in their hygiene bags. 20 minutes was enough for all the students to finish checking out their equipment. At 6 o'clock sharp, a sharp whistle sounded. Students wearing the training uniforms of each country, helmets and combat vests issued by the Monfei military, and rifles strapped to their backs could be seen sprinting briskly toward the trucks parked in the designated area. There was no sound of talking, only the sound of footsteps. Whichever country was the fastest to reach the truck that would take them through the simulation village would be the first country's students to set off. They were racing against time for their subsequent matches. The students who were able to stand here and participate in the competition were all the cream of the crop from each country's military academy. Their brains, stamina, mobility, and reflexes were all top-notch. When the whistle sounded, their brains and bodies reached an unprecedented, synchronized response as they sprinted towards the truck. Faster, faster, faster. Faster, faster. They're right in front. Let's go faster. They're catching up. The distance shortened from 200 meters to 100 meters, then 100 meters, then a few dozen meters. The closer they got, the more languages they spoke. Especially when they saw their comrades falling behind by a large margin, they urged them on in their own country's language as they ran. Yi Qian listened to all sorts of languages. Although he could not understand them, he could feel the urgency in their voices and their determination to win. They were all the cream of the crop in their military academies. Fighting for the upper echelons had become a part of their nature, and the Chinese students were no exception. Yi Qian, you run first. Don't wait for them. Zhang Minghong, who was only a few steps behind Yi Qian, shouted, stand behind the truck and take down the red flag. Cheer for your comrades behind. Where the red flag pointed, press forward with indomitable will. It was the best way to ignite the iron-blooded loyalty of your comrades. When Yi Qian heard this, she tightened the grip on the rifle on her back. After gathering her strength, she sprinted like a tornado. She ran too fast, so fast that the dried grass under her military boots rolled up. She ran so fast that the dust in her wake rose high into the air. She was a female soldier who had undergone 7 years of special training. She was also a female soldier of the Special Forces. The explosive power she displayed was astonishing. In an instant, she had left the tall and burly students from the Western military academies in the dust. They could not see her face clearly, and even her silhouette. She was too fast, so fast that it was as if she was walking with the wind. Those who were overtaken by her, and they did not even have time to react. From the very beginning, the Japanese students regarded the Chinese students as their #1 enemy. They were not as ignorant as the Korean students, who thought that the Chinese students were a very poor country. They had done a detailed analysis of the various Chinese military academies. Although they could not obtain the internal information of the Chinese military academies, they could see the rise of a big country through the Chinese military channel. They could see the importance that the big country placed on the military academies. Through their analysis, they believed that the Chinese military academy was no longer the same as before. Then, the students from the Chinese military academies were no longer the same as before. When the whistle blew, the Japanese students were already secretly competing with the Chinese students. From the barracks to the field to the inventory of equipment, all the students had only one goal in mind: to be the first to take down the Chinese. Chapter 36-32. Just as the Japanese wanted to run to the truck to gather everyone and overtake the other students, Yi Qian suddenly overtook the other students. Then, she overtook the 2 Japanese students who were especially good at endurance running. It all happened so fast that the 2 male students from Japan only felt a strong gust of wind blow past them. Then, they saw a female student overtake them. 2 male students from the Japanese island shouted in a short and hurried voice, "Did you see who it was?" "I didn't see who it was." "Not all. She's too fast. Catch up to her. Quick." The other male student from Japan didn't see it clearly either. They only knew that a female student from an Asian country had overtaken them. In the meantime, there were only 2 military school students from the Asian countries competing with the European military school students. Yi Qian showed her amazing explosive power. While the other students were checking their equipment, Li Jingyan, who had gone to the truck to wait, lost sight of Yi Qian. The moment the whistle blew, Li Jingyan, who was holding the binoculars, locked onto Yi Qian. Even if she continued to run, he would still be able to see Yi Qian. But now he could not see her. She had suddenly disappeared from his binoculars. In the gap between the students in the front and the students slightly behind, a figure barged in, causing Li Jingyan's binoculars to lock onto it again. After locking onto it, a faint smile appeared on the young lieutenant colonel's cold face. She had already reached the front of the running team. Yi Qian could not overtake the front of the team. This was because the team was made up of students from the Western military schools. There were also a few black military students whose skin was so dark that it reflected light. Compared to them who were good at running, Yi Qian, as an Asian, was not good enough to surpass them. The sudden addition of Yi Jian, a military academy student from an Asian country, to the group of tall Western military academies, surprised the Western military academies. Moreover, she was a female student. The two students from St. Cyr Military Academy and the U.S. Naval Academy recognized Yi Jian. They stretched out their hands and smiled. Gimme. 5. What a great Chinese female student. Awesome. Yi Jian, who had used his fastest speed, saw this and smiled helplessly. He communicated in fluent English. Try. My best. Gimme 5. He opened his hands and high-fived them. He finally made it to the truck. She didn't even notice Li Jinyan, who was standing beside the truck. He supported himself with both hands on the back of the truck and jumped onto the truck in a dashing manner. He put down the back of the truck first, then took down the red flag that represented the country and stuck it on the top of the truck door. He stood beside the truck and waved it. The bright red flag was bathed in the brightest morning sunlight and fluttered in the wind. The red was dyed with the blood and souls of the martyrs. It was too red, too bright, and too eye-catching. The Chinese students who were still running looked up and saw that the red flag, fluttering in the wind, was the beacon that guided them forward. Faster, faster, just a little bit faster. It was time to charge. It was time to charge. The first to arrive was Jiang Yang from the Air Force Academy. His young face was filled with indomitable determination as he ran over. He jumped into the car and stood steadily in the car, waiting for his comrades to arrive. Chapter 36-33. When Yi Jian used this move, the students from other countries immediately followed suit. The national flag was the belief that soldiers swore loyalty to, regardless of which country the students were from. When they saw their country's national flag fluttering in the wind, they would feel a sense of pride. They would have no regrets, even if their blood was spilled. The Chinese students jumped onto the truck one by one. They pulled on each other's hands and pulled on the rear panel of the truck. With a click, the panel was put back together. Instructor Li Jinyan then jumped onto the front passenger seat of the truck and headed to the competition venue. This was a competition that gathered the students from the Navy, Army, and Air Force academies from all over the world. Naturally, there would be a comprehensive military application competition for the students from the Navy, Army, and Air Force. Therefore, this competition would have both the Navy's, Army, and Air Force's battle tactics. The combination of the three military forces required cooperation with each other, which was often more difficult than a single military force. This was also the difficulty of this competition. Every country had sent out students from all three military forces. Therefore, every country would face the same difficulty in this competition. Therefore, the way to victory would depend on the individual students' abilities and the degree of cooperation between the students. The Chinese students were the last to receive the invitation. They did not have any joint training like the other countries. The Chinese students only had in-depth exchanges when they met up. In just a few short days, they had formed the most basic tacit understanding by lining up. From the simple action of pulling on each other's hands and pulling on each other's hands, it could be seen that the students had a very high degree of tacit understanding between them. The Chinese students boarded the truck in a single breath, no matter in terms of speed or coordination. There was no sense of stagnation at all. In addition, Yi Jian suddenly waved a bright and dazzling red flag. This action instantly inspired all the Chinese students. The moment they held hands, they were like comrades behind each other, and they were like guardians of each other's lives. The degree of tacit understanding between them soared. The sudden move by the Chinese students gave the other countries a lot of psychological pressure. This was because they saw the high degree of cooperation between the Chinese students. After the Japanese students jumped into the truck, all 16 of them had serious expressions on their faces. The atmosphere in the truck was heavy. The leader of the group was a student from the Japan Maritime Self-Defense Force Cadre Candidate School named Maki Fujishima. As the truck moved, his expression became more and more serious. The strength of the Chinese students is deeper than we thought. Now that the instructor can't remind us immediately, we need to reflect on ourselves. Since we treat the Chinese students as our strongest opponents, then we have to imagine their strength as our strongest opponents, and not think that although they are strong, we are stronger. That was a wrong idea and a wrong judgment. Because of the wrong idea and wrong judgment, the Chinese students arrived on the bus before us. Next up is the rescue mission for the poison area. Please remember that our side is facing a very powerful opponent. We need to defeat this powerful opponent. His voice was very deep, and there was a strong hostility in it. He directly treated the competition venue as a battlefield, and the students of the various countries on the field were enemies that they had to defeat. After his reminder, the Japanese students sitting in the car all nodded their heads vigorously. Chapter 36-34. The Japanese instructor, who was sitting in front, saw the focused faces of his country's students through the viewing window. His tightened jaw relaxed a lot. He believed that his country's students had seen the strength of the Chinese side and realized that they had to work harder in the competition. In this regard, the Japanese instructor was very pleased. The pressure on the Korean students was even lower. They were later than the Japanese students and also later than the Chinese students. They could accept it if they were later than the Japanese students, but if they were later than the Chinese students, they couldn't accept it at all. We can't accept that we lost to the Chinese students. But now we are too late. It's useless to think about it. We need to work harder. We must not let the Chinese students surpass us. After speaking in a heavy tone, the leader stretched out his hand. The students sitting in 2 rows reached out their hands and overlapped the hands of the students sitting opposite them. The leader asked them, "Do you have the confidence to surpass China and defeat Japan?" "Yes, yes, yes." They answered their team leader in a strong and energetic voice. They were absolutely confident that they could defeat the Chinese team and defeat the Japanese team. Very good. I hope we can surpass the Chinese team and defeat the Japanese team in every competition. With the assurance of the participants, the leader of the Korean team revealed a faint smile. He was also confident that he could surpass the Chinese team and defeat the Japanese team. The Japanese and Korean students were not the only ones who were afraid of the Chinese team. The other participants from Southeast Asia and South Asia were also afraid. The blood-red flag fluttering in the wind was deeply imprinted in their minds. Even if other countries followed suit, they were not as shocked as the Chinese team. The Chinese team is an unbeatable nation. Very great. A student from a certain country commented on the Chinese team after being shocked. The Chinese team did not think so much. They knew that the next competition was to rescue the poisoned area. They had already started to make arrangements and plans. They did not know the details of the next rescue in the poisoned area, but the overall deployment still needed to be discussed. They needed to have a general direction. Half an hour later, the truck stopped. It was a fairly flat wasteland. There were many small and straight trees growing on the wasteland. That was the simulated village. The students from various countries were going to enter the wasteland forest. They needed to find the villagers who needed to be rescued from the forest covered with waterproof desert camouflage cloth. Yi Qian jumped out of the truck and saw his brother standing not far away. His calm eyes were full of trust as he looked at the students calmly. When the competition started, the instructors were not allowed to get close to the students. They were not allowed to communicate with the students until the end of the competition. These were the rules of the competition. Soon, the Monfei military's dispatcher guided the students into the competition. The instructors of each country stood outside and watched the students finish the competition. The rules of the competition were dictated in English, and there were no paper documents. As a result, there was a lot of pressure on the translators from some countries. He had to translate every sentence he heard so that the students in his country could understand. The atmosphere was solemn. Chapter 36-35. The Chinese team didn't have an interpreter with them because the English of the 16 students was quite good. Tianqin was fluent in 3 languages. At this moment, Yi Qian noticed the serious expressions on the faces of the foreign students. She couldn't help but purse her lips slightly. The special forces of the Snowfield Brigade were fluent in at least 3 languages. Some of them, like Wu and Yu, were even fluent in other languages. On the other hand, she didn't know a 3rd language other than English. It looked like she needed to master a 3rd language in the next 2 years of school. No, it wasn't a need, it was a necessity. The rules and precautions of the competition were quickly read out. Then, the students from each country had 10 minutes to come up with a battle plan. Li Jinyan received the English version of the competition rules. When his gaze landed on the second item, his eyes narrowed slightly. The second item said, "Use CN tear gas during the competition until the end of the competition." This was real tear gas, not the smoke grenades used during training. As far as he knew, among the 16 students, only Yi Qian had real tear gas training. The rest of the students hadn't. Tear gas usually had ingredients, such as irritants and solvents. The CN tear gas used this time was phenylchloroethyl ketone, which was an acute toxic substance. This acute toxic substance could cause poisoning through inhalation and skin contact. It would cause a burning sensation in the chest, difficulty breathing, vomiting, rashes, burns, and blurred vision. At high concentrations, it could cause rapid and severe poisoning and could even be fatal. The military had actually used CN instead of the safer OC capsaicin. Li Jinyan's calm eyes darkened slightly. His slender fingers held the folder, and his gaze lifted slightly as he looked straight ahead. It was a stretch of undulating forest. The trees were small, and the bark was grayish-white. They grew densely and in a straight line. The ventilation was reduced, and the effect of the tear gas spray was increased. The danger was also greatly increased. Li Jinyan's brows furrowed slightly. He continued reading and skipped the middle section to the equipment introduction. There was a comprehensive breathing protective equipment with a chemical filter which could prevent organic vapors, dust, smoke, and fog. There was a C-grade non-airtight protective suit, self-portable protective gear for escape, chemical anti-splash goggles, a face mask, anti-seepage gloves, and a protective target. The equipment specifications were very high. Li Jinyan's dark eyes gradually calmed down. Although they were using CN tear gas, they were equipped with such high-quality equipment. Although the students hadn't really received CN tear gas training, they still had smoke grenades training. The entire training was the same as real CN tear gas. Chapter 36:36. I took a look at the equipment. The specifications are quite high, so you don't have to worry about safety. But before you go in, you must make sure that your equipment is properly equipped. Make sure that your masks are properly equipped, that your gloves are properly fastened, and that your helmets are properly ventilated. You must check all of these. The CN tear gas can penetrate through the skin, so you must ensure that your skin has zero contact with the air. Yi Qian, with a serious expression, looked at all the students one by one. His voice was soft and cold as he said, "The CN tear gas isn't scary. What's scary is going in without proper equipment. Don't worry, we've trained for C-grade equipment. I guarantee that there won't be any leaks." Zhang Yang from the Air Force said, "The 4 of us have trained for C-grade equipment. It depends on whether you guys have it." "Yes, we've trained for both B-grade and C-grade equipment. We have it too. Don't worry about that." The students from the 4 military academies all expressed their opinions. They were very confident in their professional training. "I believe in you guys. Then, let's hurry up and discuss the deployment." Yi Qian smiled and nodded. The next second, his smile disappeared and his expression turned serious again. "There are no blueprints for the poison area. The entrance is easy, but the exit is the key. But if we take too long to find the exit, we might be killed in action. After entering the simulated village, look for any special signs. If there aren't any, we'll have to find the exit ourselves. This is a time race and rescue race. We have to race against time and evacuate all the villagers who need to be rescued. This place must not be chaotic. If it's chaotic, it will be even harder to find the exit. We need to rescue a total of 8 villagers. 2 people in a group. With Yi Qian's arrangements, time ticked by. Xia Jinyuan had intentionally guided Yi Qian on how to deploy the troops. In addition to their own experience, every student had a very clear idea of what to do. They didn't feel confused at all. Normally, they rarely used tear gas during training. Now that they were going to use it for real, Yi Qian emphasized on the protective measures. She had experienced the true power of tear gas before, so she was afraid that there would be problems with the protective measures. During their training in the military academies, they used smoke bombs to pass through the nuclear, biological, and chemical zones. There was only smoke and no toxicity. The training in the National University of Science and Technology was the same. Once, Su-Wen didn't feel at ease and was careless with the protective measures. After being caught by Yi Qian, she was scolded so badly that she couldn't even raise her head. Yi Qian reminded them again and again to prevent any incidents of inadequate protective measures. On the other hand, the students from the world-renowned military academies, such as Western Point, were very calm. This was because they had all experienced real tear gas training. This was especially true for Western Point. After entering the academy, all of their students had to go through a tear chamber without any protective measures or masks. After that, they had to stay inside for a full minute before coming out. When they came out, their eyes were red with tears, and they choked and coughed with snot coming out. The tear house was a tear gas house, but it wasn't a CN tear gas. It was a highly safe OC tear gas. This time, the new West Point students learned the importance of protective measures. Li Jinyan saw that the students from West Point and other famous military academies were very calm. He pursed his thin lips. When he went back, he would write a report. He would report the advantages and disadvantages of the Chinese students, West Point students, and the students from the other famous military academies. The Chinese could imitate the tear house. Chapter 36-37. 10 minutes of preparation time was up, and the whistle blew again. The students from each country quickly put on their protective gear, quickly and steadily. From masks to gloves, self-contained protective gear, chemical anti-splash goggles, face shields, anti-seepage gloves, and protective targets, everything was meticulously and neatly put on. At this time, you would notice that the Chinese students were putting on their gear in the same order. They were all following Yi Qian's command. At this time, the tacit understanding they had developed while lining up showed. When they lined up, their actions were orderly and they were used to immediately following the command. At this time, when Yi Qian gave the command, the students were able to complete their gear more quickly and effectively. Up ahead in the forest, thick smoke could be faintly seen. The wind blew from that direction. Standing 200 meters away, they could almost smell the pungent smell of CN gas. Their throats were faintly stinging. The instructors in charge of treating and evacuating the injured had been calculating the time for the students from each country. The timer had already started from the moment they started putting on their protective gear. After the Chinese students finished putting on their gear, they picked up their stretchers and rushed into the forest with Yi Qian's low and sure go sound. Because they finished putting on their gear at the same time, no one was left behind. The instructors in charge of treating and evacuating the injured looked at the Chinese students. When the Chinese students were ready to set off at the same time, the instructor looked at the time and nodded lightly. Very good. They finished putting on their gear very quickly. However, it was unknown if they were serious about putting on their gear. If they were not, then it would be really pitiful. They would be driven out of the forest by the CN tear gas and lose points. The gear was very heavy, as if they were wearing a thick layer of armor. They also had to run 200 meters to enter the forest. Running while wearing masks made breathing difficult, so their speed would inevitably slow down. However, no one stopped to rest. They followed closely behind Yi Qian and rushed into the forest. The Chinese team was not the first to rush into the forest. Before them, students from 3 countries had already rushed into the forest. The time difference was very short, less than 2 minutes. The Japanese were 1 minute and a few dozen seconds behind the Chinese team. The Koreans and Japanese had set off at almost the same time, and were only a few dozen seconds behind. However, the Korean students were eager to win, especially when they knew that the Chinese team had beaten them. They ran with all their might. Run, run quickly. Overtake them. We must overtake them. The Korean students kept up with the Japanese students and encouraged each other to surpass them in terms of speed. However, the Japanese students were not to be trifled with. The Chinese students had already rushed to the front. With a strong opponent in front, how could they allow the Korean students to surpass them? Speed up and adjust your breathing. Charge forward. Their leader, Maki Fujishima's voice could be heard through the protective mask. He did not want to give the Korean students any chance to overtake him. The students from these two countries were competing, and so were the students from the other countries. Unwilling to be left behind, they all ran with all their might into the forest. The forest was right in front of them. The Chinese students had already started the treatment. The rescued villagers were all lifelike models. There were men and women, old and young, and they all had the standard weights of height and weight. The first to be discovered was the child. Yi Qian immediately took out the first aid equipment and gave the child a simple cleaning before putting on a mask. Meanwhile, Zhang Minghong used the radio station to provide outside support, while Yi Qian quickly equipped the child. Chapter 36-38. From the discovery of the child to the immediate removal of the medical equipment, to the simple cleaning, the wireless call for outside support, and the completion of the child's medical equipment, these were all steps of the competition. Not a single step could be omitted. If there were any omissions or errors in the order, it would be recorded in detail and the corresponding points would be deducted. Yi Qian and Zhang Minghong cooperated well. One step at a time, the other at a time. There were no omissions or errors in the order. Fire the signal flare. Let's go. When Yi Qian reported the last step, Zhang Minghong pulled the signal flare into the air. With a whoosh, the signal flare shot into the sky with a trail of fire. After placing the child on the stretcher, Zhang Minghong, who was working with her, removed the signal flare from the child's body at the same time. This was to let the officers outside know that they had confirmed the child's location and had successfully rescued the child. The desert camouflage cloth was stretched around trees, sometimes straight and sometimes curved. The entire route was very winding, and there were several forks. Now that the child had been rescued, they had to transport the child to a safe area within the stipulated time. This was where the students' attentiveness was tested. The exits were marked with special markings. They could only be found if they paid attention. Yi Qian walked to the front. Despite the strong tear gas, every step she took was very steady. She didn't show the slightest bit of impatience. She and Zhang Minghong looked left and right, quickly looking for an exit. The instructors waiting outside all looked up at the sky. This was the first signal flare fired. As for which country had fired the signal flare, it was impossible to tell. However, the Monfei military knew very well. They informed the accompanying soldiers through the walkie-talkie, and then the accompanying soldiers informed the instructors who fired the signal flare. Li Jinyan heard this. His cold eyes were as calm as an ancient well. He didn't feel surprised. He didn't need a guess to know who was the first to fire the signal flare. After all, Yi Qian had undergone professional training. She was different from the other students. He could say with certainty that she had undergone more training than the students from the world-renowned military schools like West Point. She had undergone several rounds of Devil Week and Hell Week training. The accompanying soldiers only told Li Jinyan in a low voice and did not make any obvious movements. Therefore, the instructors from Japan and Korea who were standing next to them did not notice. They were still guessing with several other Western instructors which country's trainee had fired the signal flare just now. At this moment, Yi Qian had already discovered the exit. Through her goggles, she could see the stone letters on the ground. S. Oh, S here. Let's go. It was an SOS Morse code distress signal. Following the vertical placement of the SOS, Yi Qian and Zhang Minghong successfully rescued the villagers and walked out of the poisoned area. After handing the child over to the paramedics outside, The two of them once again entered the poison zone through the exit. They needed to help the other 7 groups of students complete the rescue and evacuation of the villagers. With Yi Qian and Zhang Minghong's help, the students who were later evacuated did not need to look for the exit. They quickly followed Yi Qian and retreated in the direction of the exit. They cooperated with each other. When the smoke from the tear gas became too thick, Yi Qian put one hand on the shoulder of the student walking in front and led them out. The Chinese students passed through the poison zone in an orderly manner. However, the students from a certain Southeast Asian country were carried out by their own students. Chapter 36-39. The student who was actually carried out didn't wear the proper breathing mask. During the rescue process, the mannequin's head accidentally hit the breathing mask and inhaled the CN tear gas. He choked and covered his throat with both hands, coughing loudly and crying crazily. Because of his sudden accident, the other students didn't have time to care about the mannequin. Naturally, they focused on their own students. The radio received their call for help. The rescue personnel, who were fully equipped to prevent accidents, immediately rushed to the location of the student who inhaled the CN tear gas. Fortunately, the other student reacted quickly. He helped the student up and rushed out without delay. He chose to go directly to the entrance so that he could be rescued faster. The instructor of the other country had already rushed over. He looked very anxious, but his eyes were filled with anger. This was a mistake, the biggest mistake. It seriously affected the progress of the entire competition. The breathing mask was not properly worn. The head of the mannequin hit the mask during the rescue and inhaled a small amount of CN. The Malaysian military biochemical soldier explained to the instructor. The student who inhaled the CN gas had red eyes and a burning throat. He had a painful expression on his face. The instructor, whose eyes were filled with anger, took a deep breath and asked if the student's situation was serious. The Korean instructor, Kim Jong, had his hands behind his back. When he saw the student from Southeast Asia make such a big mistake, the corners of his mouth curved into a faint smile. He really didn't mind if more students from other countries made such a mistake. Also, he lifted his gaze slightly and glanced at Li Jinyan from the corner of his eye. If a student on the Chinese side made a similar mistake, it would be perfect and considerate. Li Jinyan felt a faint gaze fall on him. He didn't try to catch the owner of the gaze. This kind of gaze had a certain meaning and was not restrained. He didn't need to catch it to guess who it was. Instructor Li, have your Chinese students ever undergone real tear gas training? A slightly tanned instructor from Southeast Asia asked Li Jinyan. In his eyes, the instructor from China was very cold, so they didn't know how to communicate with him. They always felt that it would be presumptuous of them to say another word. Li Jinyan's face was cold, but his etiquette was always decent and elegant. When he heard the instructor's words, he looked at the instructor and replied calmly and politely. Considering the safety of the students, our country only has real OC tear gas training after the students enter the army, not CN. His answer made the instructor's face a little dignified. Our country and China are the same. They only have real OC tear gas training after they enter the army. Just now, I talked to the instructors of several Western countries and learned that their students have real tear gas training twice a semester. Also, they didn't directly tell the students that this training was real tear gas. Instead, they let the students experience it themselves. They let the students who weren't serious about wearing the equipment feel the real power of tear gas so that they can learn a lesson forever. I think our country should also have similar training. Although the students didn't make a mistake in equipment this time, there is no guarantee that there won't be a next time. Just like the students in Xinya, they made such a serious mistake today. The instructor sighed heavily and said with great regret, "It's a pity that they seriously lost points in equipment." That you're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.